Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, brought to you by and always powered by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dubdeuce85, and I'm feeling pretty excited. It's like Christmas Eve over here for me on the West Coast. Very late for those of you on the East Coast. Lots of you telling me you're staying up late with us. I'm very thankful that you guys are doing that. This is the big one. This is the big one. Day one of the round one of the tournament. You know, we've done our thing with the NIT and the play-in games, done our little bets, our DFS grinding, everything coming to this. This week's been fun, but this is the one, man. This is the money maker. We have a ton of games to go through. Mike and I were on the Mean Street show this morning talking about some brackets. I am going to be joined. I'm going to throw him through here in just a moment. My dude decided to come on. We're going to try and get through these games as fast as possible, if that's even such a thing. If it ends up running long, I might end up losing Mike. I don't know. But if I have to continue to go on alone, I will. But I think he'll stay on with us as long as we need. We'll see. But he's going to be covering the article for tomorrow. So I know lots of good stuff coming out there. I'm very, very excited. Make sure if you guys are watching live right now, or if you are doing the on-demand thing, that you hit that like button. You interact with the show with comments, questions, concerns. If it's on-demand comments, we'll circle back around and answer those as we can. Helps us within the YouTube algorithm, and anything that you can do to help us with our show on the FTN Network is much appreciated. With that out of the way, let's put the man through right now. Mike, is there a jersey swap? It was a different jersey from this morning now. He's got, I mean, the guy's got just a crazy amount. But I'm glad you're up late with me. I'm really excited. A lot of people are excited for what we got going on here. A lot of East Coasters just like you. So I am ready. I hope you are as well.
Yeah, let's get to it, Walt. I'm running on fumes at this point, but the day is almost here. It's tomorrow, so yeah, super exciting, and let's talk some hoops, dude.
Awesome, yeah. I want to get a chance to talk about some bracket stuff, but maybe we'll depending on how time is at the end, maybe we can do a little bit about that. I want to go back at our Gonzaga talk, really, but let's get into the slate here right away. We'll go right into it, starting with the first game, bright and early. 9:15 in the morning for me, noon, 12:15 for those of you on the regular coast, I guess. But West Virginia versus Maryland. Why don't you start us off here and tell us what you think about this game?
Yeah, so me and you have talked about Maryland a lot this year, and they are one of the more inconsistent teams away from College Park. Which I don't think bodes well for them in the tournament setting right here. Plus, I've kind of hammered this in the past that I'm not the hugest Kevin Willard fan, seeing him a lot here in Jersey when he was here at Seton Hall. I much more trust Bob Huggins in a tournament setting here. And Maryland's been through the ringer in the Big Ten, but they haven't really seen a physical pass denial, pressurized defense like West Virginia is going to throw at them from anyone in the Big Ten. So I think that may throw them off guard a little bit. West Virginia has the physicality and the big wings to match up with the Donta Scotts and the Hakeem Harts that Maryland's going to roll out there. I also think that they're going to have a hard time getting it into the post to your boy Julian Reese, who's come on pretty well as of late for the Terps here. So I think we're going to see a lot of Jameer Young having to create a lot of offense in isolation against Kedrian Johnson in this one. So I am leaning towards the West Virginia side in this one. I think Bob Huggins and crew can out physical the Terps here, and Huggins can out coach Willard. But from a fantasy perspective, the only real interest I have here is Jameer Young at 7,900. I think he's going to have to make a lot of plays on his own in this one and put up a lot of shots. And 7,900, we've seen him in the mid eights at some points. So I think he kind of holds value there at that price point, and I'm a little interested there. Other than that, not much interest in this game. We have a 16-game slate, so there's a lot more up-tempo, fantasy-friendly environments in this one. I think there's going to be a lot of fouls. So if you don't want to play somebody who's going to get in foul trouble, has a good chance of getting foul trouble here. The only value guy I would be looking at would be on the West side, and it's sometimes no-show Joe Toussaint over there, where he has one game where he puts up 25 to 30 fantasy points, or he has a really low floor of maybe 5 to 10 fantasy points. So if you're looking more for a GPP play, I would definitely have Toussaint in my pool. But as a main team play, it's a little dicey there. I think you can go either way.
Yeah, he's tortured us a little bit too much, especially the last maybe month or two of the season. So it is really difficult to get there. This game, like you said, not maybe the best environment for fantasy purposes, but I feel like it's one of those ones where maybe the ownership will be a little bit lower, and it's like, going to have that overtime potential, and then possibly, those extra stats, and it's going to be like, damn it, why didn't I have any of that game? And at the end there, if it does remain close, I keep on harping about it for the tournament, but you want those guys who are going to be taking those free throws at the end. West Virginia does have some pretty solid free throw shooters, guys like Hedrian Johnson, Joey T, Eric Stevenson. As much as I dislike him, he does, shoot decently at the foul line. So there's going to be some opportunity for some late points to be scored here. But I think there's way too much risk here for a main lineup. Like you said, there's a very large slate, so many games to choose from. And if you start things off, and I don't want to let this be a determining factor of me using somebody or not, but I would really hate to just brick the first game and then have to stare at that the rest of the day. I mean, there's 3 other slates that they're broken into between afternoon, night, and other stuff to play, but that's no fun. So had it been a little bit more of an exciting game, I may be a little bit more into it. I do like Hedrian Johnson. I think he's a little on the cheap side at 6'6", where he's right almost in that like last man in range that I always harp about, that 5'4" to like 6'5" range. He's just on the outside. He's somebody that I wouldn't start my lineup with, but if I ended there, I don't think I would want to rework my lineup too much. I think I'd be perfectly fine with him. He's not going to be that owned, and he's one of those guys who I do think has a chance to rack up some late game points. And same thing with Jameer Young, probably a little bit too high. I mean, it's cheap for him. It's definitely cheap, but maybe a little bit too high for this game and for the size of the rest of the slate. I am somewhat interested. There's a tight one thing about this slate we should mention. It's tight pricing. Thank God. This is like one of the tighter pricing slates that I've seen in a long time. Which is
great.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic because I prefer these are the ones I prefer because the slates that take 220 to 240 to really, win. And if you get over 200, that's usually a winning score on these type of slates. I like that because I feel like there's a little bit more skill involved. It reminds me of Draft Street, like the days of Draft Street where they priced everyone so high that you had to run deep bench guys just to have a viable lineup that was legal. It's not quite that tough, but it's definitely one of the tougher ones that DK's had in probably 2 years in terms of their pricing. So I'm a fan of this. They've priced up a lot of guys. I've heard, the complaints about Colgate guys being expensive, and Utah State is probably going to be popular, which we'll get to in a second because their pricing and Princeton guys are overpriced. Auburn guys, Oral Roberts are super jacked up. You just can't get anyone really good for that super low price. So it makes maybe a guy like Don Carey, who's 4'2" and been playing pretty well, at least an intriguing option because he's going to play 32 minutes roughly. Can he get 4x at that 4'2"? He definitely can. We've seen Ian Martinez, who I'm not definitely going to say to play, but we've seen guys like that on Maryland sort of pan out these last couple of weeks. So I do think Don Carey's a decently, approved by me value play at 4'2" if you want to go that route or you want exposure here, but certainly nobody that's going to be a priority. All right, moving on to Virginia and Furman. This is one I'm seeing as a trendier pick. We talked a little bit about this earlier, Furman being a team that a lot of people think will win. There is, the stars of the show, Mike Bothwell and Jalen Slauson, priced up accordingly, 8-3 for Slauson, Bothwell 7-7. Pretty difficult to get there, I think, just because this is a Virginia team that is still going to slow down. Even if Furman comes out hot, hitting shots and builds a lead up that Virginia's having a hard time, catching up to, I still fail to think that there's going to be too much fantasy goodness coming from them to pay off those prices. Instead, I might look at somebody like a Marcus Foster. Anyone named Marcus Foster is usually good at basketball. And JP Pigoos, who's 5'4". Both of those guys I think are okay to use if you want some Furman exposure and without having to break the bank there, because I do think that's probably a wise decision. But at the same time, going back to it, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, it's such a large slate. You don't want to get pigeonholed into taking them too much. What's your take, though, on the Virginia side going up against Furman? Because if they can get some offense flowing here, this would be a pretty decent spot for them to perform from a DFS standpoint. Guys like Armaan Franklin at 5'9", Jaden Gardner, your guy at 7'1", maybe Caden Shedrick at 4'5", who's been playing more minutes lately. Like, what do you think about Virginia side in this and overall the game?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because you see Virginia on a 16-game slate, and you're like, wow, I definitely want to stay away from this. I want to, spend my salary elsewhere. But there are some spots that you can attack in this one. You mentioned a guy that I really like in JP Pegs. He's been over 30 fantasy points in his last 5 games. He's becoming more and more of an alpha and more part of that 3-headed monster on the Furman side. And what do you need to do to beat Virginia's pack line defense? You need to be able to move the ball and shoot over the top of it, which I think we see a lot of shots from Pegs here. So 5,400, super interested in Pegs here on the Furman side. And on the Virginia side, I mean, if you look at KenPom, they're implied to score 71 points. And so fantasy points needs to come from somewhere. Where does Furman struggle? They struggle inside. Slauson's their biggest guy at 6'7", and he has to guard the opposing center. And he's really like a winger or a point forward, I guess you can call Slauson. So he's always matched up with a bigger dude trying to bang there in the boards. He always has foul risk, is Slauson, which is another thing to mention where if you're thinking about playing him, maybe don't because he is in foul trouble a lot. But, with Furman struggling inside to defend the paint, Jaden Gardner's been getting close to 35, 36, 37 minutes with Vanderplas out. I think it's a great spot for him. He's only 7,100. Nobody's going to play him because they see the Virginia tag next to his name, especially in GPP. I'm going to have my fair share of Jaden Gardner exposure for sure in this matchup. And like you mentioned, Armaan Franklin is a little too cheap. He's going to get his shots up with them projected to score 71 points. I don't mind going to Franklin there at 5,900 due to his pretty high upside because of his shot volume. But overall, 16-game slate. You're gonna keep hearing us say this. You probably could spend your money a little smarter. But I do want to mention that I do like some plays here.
Yeah, and for that large field, 50K to first, this is the type of game where you might be able to hit on a few plays. The Virginia bench pieces especially are somewhat intriguing. Right now they're starting, of course, Beekman, Gardner, Clark, Franklin as usual. With Vanderplas out, they have been going ahead and starting, at least last game, Cafaro. We know he's going to get into foul trouble usually, or just not play that much because he's really not able to go for very long. So they've been playing Isaac McNeely, Caden Shedrick, and Ryan Dunn a little bit more off the bench. Dunn played a bunch of minutes recently, and then we've seen Shedrick, who played 19 in that last one, and then McNeely, who Virginia was having a really hard time against Duke generating offense. I've been kind of keeping the McNeely place close to my vest here, but they did work with him so much in the summer about developing a shot, and he really was being leaned on a little bit more in that Duke game to generate offense. Not that he went totally crazy or anything. He had 10 points, but I definitely noticed in the second half they were looking to him a little bit more. Somewhat intriguing to me at 3.6. Ryan Dunn is 3.8, and then you have Shedrick at 4.5. So those three are all guys that you can have in those large field kind of throwaway lineups, I like to call them, where if they brick whatever, but you might hit a 1% play on one of those guys if they get hot. Maybe McNeely gets hot from long range. He's taking 4 to 5 threes a game. 3.6. He doesn't have to do a whole hell of a lot. Definitely want some exposure there. And as far as Armaan Franklin, he would suck me in at that price at 5.9, especially for main lineup like 2 years ago. But I've just come too far with him, and we don't have a good relationship and good speaking terms right now. So I won't be using him, but it wouldn't shock me if he paid that price off and then some. All right, moving on to the Utah State Missouri game. With the way the Mountain West has already started to look here. NIT game with New Mexico, they clearly, didn't care. The problem with the NIT is, teams may not care. New Mexico obviously didn't. They were getting their absolute doors blown off by Utah Valley. And then we saw Nevada had a pretty rough outing. ASU shot probably the best they've ever shot in the history of the Galaxy. Whatever that'll say. I've seen a lot of people down talking the MWC this year. I was one that was kind of down on them. They still got more teams than I thought. But I'm already starting to see the Twitter machine working about Utah State, and as in my SDSU call, they had I guess they're having some kind of plane issues or something, which is not good. But people are starting to get a little bit more down on Utah State. Maybe that bring some of this ownership away. Because even though it is that larger slate here, this is the game that I'm seeing a lot of people talk about. The Utah State guys, especially Ashworth at 7.5 isn't necessarily underpriced, but it's reasonable. And then you have a bunch of other guys in the starting lineup like Shulga, Barstow, Taylor Funk, Dorius. Then we got Danikin, who's a big time rebounder. Like there's all these guys who are pretty cheap on the Utah State side, and they're going against a Missouri team that we know absolutely is one of the worst defenses in the SEC. They're typically giving up huge performances. So I am expecting a decent amount of ownership, considering the slate. I would really be pissed if I saw someone 60%, but probably like 25 to 35% on some of these guys, namely Ashworth. What do you think about the Mountain West as a whole? And is that something that you worry about? And are you just going to kind of eat the chalk on these guys? Because I do think they'll be one of the teams that are higher owned on this slate.
Well, yeah, Nevada shouldn't have been in. It should have been Rutgers. Well, you know that. I think everybody knows that.
I definitely do.
I think they would have gave Arizona State a little more of a fight. But yeah, I mean, I'm actually on the Missouri side here. I think the Missouri pressure is going to give this backcourt a little bit of trouble. They haven't really seen a pressurized defense like that, or actually any type of high major talent really all year. I think the only Power 5 team Utah State's played all year has been Washington State. So I think they actually do struggle, the backcourt specifically, with Missouri, pressing in the 97th percentile in the country per synergy, to where guys like Ashworth, who aren't really used to having to create in isolation, or getting up in Taylor Funk's shorts or Shulga's shorts. I think it's going to wear on them a lot, and I think they actually end up struggling here against the Missouri team. Overall, this game is going to be very high tempo. Like I mentioned before, Missouri presses. Utah State, they're loaded with shooters. They're loaded with scorers, so they are going to be able to put points on the board. I just think this game just is going to favor the Missouri side a little more. So I do agree with you that pretty much everybody is in play for this game. Right, I'm looking at KenPom right now. The implied total is 162. There's going to be a lot of fantasy points, but for me, I'm going to be leaning more towards the Missouri guys like Kobe Brown or Demoy Hodge, rather than Ashworth or Taylor Funk or Shulga. That's just the way I'm going here, but I do agree with you that Utah State is going to get some love.
Yeah, and I like hearing that, because I've been looking, I've been seeing, and people show me parts of their lineups and ask me, what do you think about this 3v3 and stuff? I'm sure you get a lot of that too. And I'm seeing Ashworth in like 90% of the stuff people are showing me or talking about. And I'm just like, man, I don't really want to pay 7.5 for Ashworth, especially if he's going to be trending towards that 35-40% mark in single entry, high dollar cash game, stuff like that. Because I just don't, he's good, don't get me wrong, but I don't know that he's good enough to eat that kind of chalk on a big slate like this at 7.5. Had he been 6'4" like Shulga, I might be singing a little bit of a different tune, but I just don't feel that great about them, even though the Missouri matchup is fantastic and everybody knows that typically because of their defense. But you bring up those good points about the press and everything. That's why I love having you on, because you do that extra digging. But I'm glad to hear you say that, because I'm looking at Demoy Hodge. He's a little bit spendy at 8.3, and I know a lot of people will look at that and they'll turn away, but that's perfect like posh play territory. My man Desmond Cambridge came through tonight, but that's like just one of my special plays right there that I think I'll be on big time. Kobe Brown's great too. He's only 200 more. There was a bigger price differential between those two, which made it a little bit easier for me to continue to go to Hodge. I do like Brown, no doubt, but I just Hodge's ability to rack up peripheral stats, whether that's steals, rebounds, assists, other stuff. And then that, lately his ability to put up, 15 plus points just puts him in another tier of elite caliber DFS plays that I like to use. So I'm also going to be on Hodge. And when it comes to Hodge or Ashworth, I'm definitely going to be leaning a few hundred more to the Hodge side, which I know the rest of the industry really won't be, but it sounds like you and I are in lockstep. And we were disagreeing a little bit today, but now the universe is back in alignment. We're agreeing once again. What about DeAndre Golston, Sean East, Nick Honor? Like, what about those guys? Or Trey Gomillion? I've heard that Gomillion might step in and get some more minutes. Like, what do you do with those guys?
Yeah, they're definitely in play because especially in an up-tempo matchup, you do want to have some interest in some value guys, because they can just pick up some rebounds and assists here that kind of trickle their way. My favorite would probably be Nick Honor, because I think he can He has the highest upside of all of them with his 3-point shooting ability. Do I love playing Nick Honor? No, I'd rather play other value guys. And again, 16 game slate. I think there's other plays in that same price range that I like a little better than these guys because of the high variance a lot of these guys show.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Missouri values are definitely not main team caliber. I really want to be able to use Sean East though. I think those are one of those 3-9.
I like him too.
Yeah, he's one
I
of
like
those
his
guys.
game.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I agree, and I know you like his game a lot. I like his game. I think he's very active when he's in. It's just the minutes. Well, sometimes he gets 25, sometimes he gets 15. You really want to play someone playing 15 minutes? It's tough.
Like they threw him out there 30 minutes against Tennessee, which gives me hope, but then right back down to 20. And it's just been he's not shooting well right now, which is, making him a liability to be on the floor. And when he's not scoring, he's really not giving us anything from a DFS perspective. And he's one of those guys that I know in the past how good he has been. And I kind of value him a little bit more than the average person. And I kind of want to use him, but I know that it probably won't work out. And I'm still chasing that Trevelyan Queen game from a couple years ago, low ownership, low price game. So I'm still looking for that value. Sean East definitely fits the mold, but I don't know that he'll be the guy for us. All right, moving on to the next game, Kansas versus Howard. Speaking of some potential value looks that we can have here, Howard guys are definitely on the radar here. It's a tough situation because a lot of people don't want to target these 15 and 16 seeds against the high major guys. They typically struggle or there's blowouts that happen. But we've seen over the past couple of years targeting these teams isn't such a bad idea. Just 2 years ago, Hartford was on the slate, and there were 2 or 3 of their guys that actually came through. If you double stacked Hartford, you cashed that tournament because they actually performed quite well despite losing by 18, 20 plus points. On the Howard side, they had a very nice MEAC tournament. They beat a very hard Norfolk State team that a lot of people expected to win. Shai Odom is the player that I was talking about during that tournament. He didn't have the best game in the final, 9.7 rebounds a block. He had some early foul trouble, which affected some of his minutes, and that does, kind of go up and down for him. But he's priced here at the 4-3 price point, and the forward at Kansas has that high foul rate, which is definitely going to make people a little bit scared or borderline terrified. But I don't know that Kansas will necessarily get him into foul trouble, at least not right away. And I kind of feel like we'll see, the mid-20s minutes from him that we really need for him to pay this price off. His rates are solid enough, 25% usage rate, 24% shot rate. He has a 10.5% offensive rebounding rate. That's top 170. Overall combined rate of 24%. He does draw almost 6 fouls per 40, so he has that going for him. On non-3-point field goals as well, he's shooting pretty close to 60%. So he gets a lot of bunnies, a lot of putbacks. He's very, very good. He's a very young player. He's going to turn into, I think, a really solid player at that level. But there definitely is some risk. But I think against a different number 1 seed, he may have, get into the foul trouble. But I might be wrong here. I think against Kansas, maybe we avoid that a little bit. And then there is also Marcus Dockery, who's sitting there for even cheaper at 3.6. Another guy that we could potentially look at. The starting lineup that Howard normally rolls with is Elijah Hawkins, Dockery, Steve Settle, Shai Odom, and Jordan Wood. They do go a little bit deeper in the rotation at times, but Dockery had played 29 minutes in the final there. He's somebody we know he's going to be on the floor, sub 4K. Rights wise, he's got a 21% shot rate. Where he's going to come into play is the fact that he's shooting almost 45% from long range, and that's on volume on 128 attempts. So we're really just kind of chasing 3-pointers with him. Again, going up against Kansas, even if it turns into a blowout, we're still going to get those minutes from these guys. We don't have to necessarily worry about that. And I typically don't worry about blowouts in college basketball anyways. There's a couple of other values on the slate that maybe have a little bit better rates or are better known commodities. But I think one of these Howard guys can fit into our main lineups here pretty nicely at those prices. I might be wrong, but that's where my head is at. What do you think about those guys? And what about Kansas if McCullough's out or limited, I guess?
Yeah, I think the last I heard was McCullough was trending towards playing. So just the last thing I've heard. But yeah, I mean, it is always scary to again, 16 game slate to play guys in the 116 where there's going to be a potential blowout, which could affect fantasy scores. But the one thing that sticks out to me about this Howard team is that they actually have the size and athleticism that can get up and match a power five team like Kansas. Like they have some big dudes on this Howard team. They're not going to get crushed on the boards or get crushed in transition. They're fast and they have some guys. Kansas is way more talented and way more skilled than Howard, but as far as like an athleticism gap that you usually see in this 116, you don't really see it here with this Howard team. Another thing I noticed with this Howard team is that they ran through the MEAC and had a ton of blowouts where their starters were benched for a lot of the second half. So you see a lot of them with these weird stat lines where they only played maybe 17, 18, 21, 22 minutes that had put down their usage rates. And I think that's a big reason why we see their salaries a little low here. So they are a little cheap. I 100% agree with you, Walt. Those two guys you mentioned, Shai Odom, who's more come on late for Howard this year, and Dockery as well. They both are going to get a decent amount of minutes. And if Howard can compete in this game, I think they're pretty viable value plays. I also like Jelani Williams too. He just had that big game in the MEAC final. And he's sitting there at 4,600. If he gets hot, he's one of their go-to scorers. So I like him as a value play too. So I think you have three guys to choose from this Howard squad. Would I play all three or two of the three? I don't know. I would try to stick to one maybe because there is a lot of risk here. So tread lightly in the 116. But yeah, I have some interest on the Howard side for value. And on the Kansas side, I actually think that Jalen Wilson at 9,300 is another incredible pay up spot here. I think he has like a floor of 20 and 10 here. I think he's going to be aggressive. You have McCullough banged up. You have Grady Dick, who's a little banged up. DeJuan Harris isn't going to shoot. Even if he was the only player on the team, he's still not going to shoot. So I think a lot of the offense is going to go through Jalen Wilson early and often. And I think they're going to funnel everything to him. I think he's going to be aggressive. I think they're going to look to get him going early. And I don't think anybody on Howard has a chance of stopping him. So I do have interest in Jalen Wilson here as a pay up. And you'll notice as we go through the rest of the slate, the way that my roster construction in general probably is going to favor towards is paying up for one or two of these forwards and using guards as value plays. So Jalen Wilson is definitely one of my pay up options, let's say. But that's really the only side on Kansas side. Like maybe you can think about KJ Adams at 5,800 in a game where he might be involved a little bit. But he's a little too high variance for me to play in a main.
Yeah, Adams is going to be another one of those like large field, the 50K to first plays because, we saw him kind of like the early part of the conference season in January into February. He played really, really well and started coming into his own, and people really were slow to notice. And now he's really fallen off and kind of regressed back to more of a role player. But at 5'8" here, there's at least upside if he does perform closer to what he looked like in early January against a team that he can definitely rebound against. But like you said, this Howard team, I don't think they're going to back down. That Norfolk State game, I watched that. That was pretty telling of how tough they looked out there, and they were not shaken at all. When it looked like they were going to fall apart, they definitely came back and played well. And that Norfolk State team is, as I'm sure you know, with Bryant, they're a good
Joe Bryant, man.
Yeah, they're a good squad.
Tough.
So if McCullough's playing, then that kind of wipes Yesefu off the plate for a value. There was some chatter about him earlier in the week. He played back-to-back games over 20 minutes, 3-5. Probably don't need to look at him, unless you're really playing that blowout angle and you want to have some Yesefu in like one of your 150 lineups. If you're doing the mini max or something, it's fine. But yeah, he's far away from a main team play now. And I do like the Jalen Wilson call because this slate, like I said, I don't know that we're going to see a ton of like these high 6-7x type returns. I think we're going to be looking at such tight pricing that the scoring is going to be a little bit lower. So really put an emphasis on the raw points or just avoiding any really big landmines. And I don't think that Jalen Wilson is going to give us any landmines here. And he typically doesn't. There's been like maybe 2 games this season where he totally bombed out, one of which was against Texas, a month ago, and one of which was against West Virginia, where he still had over 20, but for him, it was under 25. So it's typically a bad one. Usually he's over 30. So, and he's cheap enough at 9.3. He's not like 10.5 or something crazy where like, man, still the 30 is not going to work. Like 30 to 35 out of him here is going to be enough, I think, to really kind of, keep you along the way and get you to the next set of games without feeling like your lineup's totally dead. I do like DeJuan Harris a little bit more. I fell into that trap against Texas because his offense had stepped up lately. His peripherals are usually still good, and he's getting those assists, blocks, steals. but his scoring against Texas went right back to the way it normally is. So he's definitely a little bit more risky at 7-2 than you probably think. So I'm on board with the Wilson call, and I'll have to decide between Odom and Dockery. I like the call there on Jelani Williams at 4-6. I'm one of those guys when I get somebody in my scopes and they're like one of my guys. You're the same way in that draft tonight. Love the way you drafted. Shy Odom is just he's becoming one of my guys. So I'm on board with using him right now.
Walt's guys,
my favorite Howard, my favorite Howard play. All right, now we go to the Alabama side of things, and perhaps this is a game we need to worry a little bit about the blowout factor because this Alabama team has bench pieces that it would be beneficial for them to get some of these guys in. Noah Gurley, Pringle, Bradley, some of the youngsters, maybe not Gurley necessarily because he's not young, but Pringle and Bradley, some of that valuable tournament experience. Get some from my man Namari Burnett, maybe Griffin, some of these other guys. And Gurley could come in and play 15 minutes. We know from his Furman days, imagine him on this Furman team, that he can put the ball in the hole and hit some shots once in a while. He just hasn't been given the opportunity, but his minutes have been trending in the right direction, at least lately. The Texas A&M Corpus Christi team, that game, was it yesterday, the play-in game, man, the first half, both of those teams were so shaky, had a lot of jitters. I was kind of surprised because the Islanders were in the tournament just last year, and Tennyson was the one that, having to take on some more of the ball handling duties, man. He was dribbling off his foot. He looked totally out of sorts. Now you're asking this team to go in and play against Alabama. If they were nervous against, yesterday in the play-in game against SEMO, what's going to happen against Alabama? So I'm very concerned about the Islanders' plays. I think they're fine to use in GPPs maybe, but I don't know. And there's going to be a lot of people, Jalen Jackson, he went off. He's 5'3". He's great. Michelle is only 5'9" after being 8K. Like, I get it. Simeon Fryer got the start. His rates are like microscopic, but somehow he was playing to almost 30% usage rate in the first half, which is totally out of character for him. I think some people might chase that. Going back to tennis, if anything, I would like to go back to Tennyson at 5'5" because I don't know that a lot of people will be there with him. But this Islanders team is really not very good, and you're asking them to go against one of the defenses, at least I think, one of the better defenses in the tournament with Alabama, which I respect a whole lot and typically like to avoid with other SEC high caliber programs. So going against them with a lower major team doesn't seem like the most beneficial thing to me personally. Not saying they won't pan out because of how cheap they are, but I'm just not going to sit here and get all hyped about Jalen Jackson's big game when he's going to be defended by these Alabama, guards. On the Alabama side, though, Bediako sitting there at 4.8, a walking foul risk always, but my God, he just absolutely nuked. I had a good slate that last day of the conference tournaments. It would have been even better. I couldn't complain. You make money, whatever, but I would have been better if I had Bediako in the large field, putting up the 42 that he had before eventually fouling out in 29 minutes. He had struggled against Texas A&M. I talked about this with Razzle on that show, but coming alive there. He's played really well. He scored 21 plus fantasy points in 4 straight. As long as he gets over 20 to 21 minutes here, he should be able to do some serious damage. So if anything, he's the one that I want to look at here for value and feel good about. I just don't want him to get too overexcited and over-aggressive and end up getting too early fouls or something. And we know that these guys will play with fouls, but at this point, as long as he gets 20 minutes, I feel very, very good about him. I think Noah Gurley at min price is actually really interesting for tournaments. He's been playing more minutes. He's really talented. He just hasn't been able to get on the floor as much this year, but we saw him at Furman. He was a key contributor, and he played a lot more last year for this team. So I do think he's okay at 3K as well. And then, like I said, sprinkling these different guys like Burnett, Pringle, Griffin in your various GPP lineups feels like a good idea to me because I think they might see a little bit of additional time. Not 30 minutes, but somewhere between 14 to 18 minutes, which is enough for Griffin to pay off 3K. It's enough for Gurley to pay off. Pringle at 3.4. Like, those guys can pay that off because their usage rates in the last, 5 to 7 minutes of that game are going to be really high. They're going to be out there trying to take shots. They're going to be trying to grab. They're going to be doing everything they can, a condensed version of a full game in that 5-minute period, which is just going to skyrocket their stats for 3K. So that's kind of where my head is at with this game on the Bama guys. And of course, Brandon Miller, I did use him over the weekend at low ownership. He's fantastic always. If you can get there at 10-2, I don't mind it because I'm used to a safe amount of points coming his way. But it does force you to have to play a couple more values that maybe I'm not personally as comfortable with. Sounds like you may be because of the way you're building, and that's fine. But where's your head at with Miller and I guess the rest of this game? Because it's a really intriguing one to me.
Yeah, so I talked about last game that in the 116 matchup that Howard does have the size and athleticism that could at least match up with that Kansas team. And this is a complete opposite. I mean, this Corpus Christi team is a little tiny, and Alabama's got some dudes, as we all know. I think the size and athleticism disparity in this matchup is just going to be way too much, which in these type of matchups, we see it happen in the non-con is when these power conferences go against these low majors, is that typically the bigs dominate, and that's where a guy like Bediako can have a big game, have an easy double-double, block some shots even in 20 minutes. So he's probably my favorite play in this whole matchup here, specifically at 4,800. For me, Brandon Miller is a little too high. I'd rather play somebody like Jalen Wilson, like I said before, because I do think that Alabama could run away with this game. And like you said, Alabama's got a bunch of dudes, so I think we see a lot of those guys, Pringle, Griffin, Bradley, Burnett, all those guys come off the bench and get a little bit more of a run here. So I do like sprinkling those guys in GPP because they're all high usage when they do get playing time. And I'd rather pay up for somebody else than Brandon Miller in this matchup, and I'd rather stick to the bigs on Alabama to kind of dominate the glass, block some shots, get some easy putback dunks. So Bediako's the guy that I'd be looking for here. But again, he has massive foul risk. This is a 116 where they can win by potentially 30 points. So tread lightly, but he's the guy for me.
Yeah, so I agree. And yeah, speaking on rates, Griffin has a 22% shot rate and Burnett has almost 21% shot rate. So when those guys are on the floor, even for those minuscule amount of minutes, they're taking a lot, they're doing a lot, and you give them even 5 to 10 more minutes, and that just makes them a really solid option. Not safe to use in your high dollar main stuff, whatever, but there's definitely some potential for one of those guys to really, hit hard. Maybe even, I don't know if Don Welch is any kind of healthy to play at all, but if they could even get him in at least a little bit, that would be nice because, we know how good he's been. That would get another shooter out there, but we'll see. So pretty much in lockstep there. I'm kind of hoping that people they see what the Islanders and go based off the prices of that game against SEMO and go to somebody like Michela because he's 5'9" now, not 8K. But yeah, this is a really just not a good team. I don't want to track too much. But,
the one guy I would, and I mean, it's important to remember that their best player's hurt, right? He got hurt in the in the Southland Championship game. Terrian Murdoch, he's been their best player all year, so he's out. And if you're going to go with an Islander guy, for me, you have to go with Jalen Jackson because to me, he's the one who stepped up and taken over that alpha guard role. We've seen his usage rate spike to over 30%. I think it was actually 40% against Northwestern State in the championship game. So at 5,300, he's coming off 2 pretty big games. That's the only guy I don't mind. It would be Jalen Jackson here, but again, I think there's a lot of other spots you can attack, other than going up against Alabama.
True, and I would like the idea of going back to Tennyson because he still took 14 shots yesterday. Yeah. But man, he just was so timid. It just worries me. He's much better in that sidekick role. I noticed from watching a couple of their games during their conference tournament. So, we'll move right along here. We'll go to the SDSU, the Aztecs, of course, versus College of Charleston. This was one that I had one of my, I guess, semi-hot takes because I felt pretty passionately about the Aztecs winning this game. I know it's a popular, 12-5 pick. I feel like the undersized, aspect there for Charleston will be a problem, even though they've been good on the glass. I think the fact that they rely on threes at times is going to hurt them because we know the Aztecs, they get up on you and play elite D. But this whole plane delay situation, I don't know how much that's going to screw things up. The Mountain West is already pretty fragile, as they would say. They're fragile. And I'm a little bit nervous about this game at this point now. So I'm not quite sure where I want to go yet. My head is a little bit in the clouds when it comes to this one. And I know I want the Aztecs to win, so I don't have to take the reaming on Twitter from a few people who are chomping at the bit to do so. But DFS-wise, I'm feeling a little bit lackluster about this one. I do like Lamont Butler, but I want to hear your take on this one first.
Yeah, I mean, Walt, stick to your guns, man. I am in 100% agreement with you that San Diego State matches up very, very well with this Charleston team. they take away pretty much everything Charleston wants to do. Charleston wants to get out and transition and play at a fast tempo. They want to play a ton of guys and wear you down. They want to get out on the offensive glass, and they want to shoot a ton of threes. San Diego State takes all of that away from you. They have a ton of dudes. They have a deep bench. They pressure you on defense. I think Charleston's going to struggle here. So looking at the implied total, it's one of the lower ones on the slate. I don't think there's that much fantasy friendliness here, so I don't think we need to spend too much time. But there are some value plays that you maybe want to look at. You said Lamont Butler. He is a little too cheap, in my opinion. He is, 4,600. I think Trammell also is a little too cheap at 4,700. He's probably outside of Bradley's, probably the Aztecs' best offensive player. And then if you want to get a little bit cute, I mean, Jadon Lede has come on late and could be a massive mismatch for this Charleston team down low, depending on how many minutes he's going to get. But he's sitting there at 5,300. We've seen him have a high ceiling. I don't mind mixing him in at GPPs as well. On the Charleston side, I'm really not interested in much. I do see Rain Smith is pretty cheap there at 4,400. He can potentially get really hot. He takes a lot of threes. He's kind of similar to Noah Locke, where you really don't want to play him, but there are those few performances where he can go off and hit 6-7 threes and put up a 30 spot at 4,400. So I do have him in my player pool, but not too much to like here. I think San Diego State controls the tempo, kind of puts them in the grinder. And if you want to, look for some San Diego State value, you have Butler and Trammell there to mix and match with if you want. But overall, not the greatest fantasy environment.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the Aztecs will do, offensively, they're not the greatest, like the Vols, and sort of see them kind of choking this team out and just grinding it to
a good way to put it. Yeah.
If it's in the 40s or the 50s, like they're perfectly content and happy with it. And Charleston wants to play it up as high as they can. Right. Interesting thing on Lede to start the season. He had these games like against Fullerton and BYU, 36% and 40% usage rate. He was actually a pretty solid DFS play at that point. And then like the minutes just kind of went away and they went away from him in general. But yeah, they've definitely gone back to him lately. Against Colorado State, he had a usage rate of 41% and 34% against Utah State. So even if he's getting 16 to 20 minutes, which I know isn't normally enough for a guy who's priced above 5K, but he's certainly worth a look there because of his amazing rates. And like you said, it's a big mismatch in terms of size. This Charleston team, just even though they're good rebounders against their level competition, but I do think they'll struggle on the glass, and Lede could have a big one. Probably better suited for GPPs because there is a lot of risk there. You could do some serious damage at that price, but also could pay off. I'm really intrigued by Darian Trammell. At the beginning of the season, if you would have told me in tournament time Trammell will be 4-7, but maybe not a main team play, I would have looked at you like you were totally out of your mind. But he has definitely gone really, really cold lately. I don't know what it is about this Aztecs program, but Bradley, who used to be my late hammer all the time when he was on Cal, I mean, he has the high shot rate, high usage rate, but his offense is just not there this year. And same thing with Trammell. He started out really good and looked like the Seattle U version of himself that was scoring at a high clip. But now he's, his shot making took a toll, and now he's even taking less shots. So I do worry about him a little bit because if he's not making those shots or taking them, there's not going to be enough to support him to hit the 20-plus fantasy points we're really looking for here. Whereas on Lamont Butler, not a great three-shooter at all either, but he has some of those other stats that he can pile up. And he did show an ability to get to the rack like he did against Colorado State. So when that shot's not hitting for him, he's not afraid to take it to the rack and generate some points. And that's exactly what he did against the Rams. So I'm using him at 4-6. I'm hoping that he mirrors that game and tries to, do some extra things to kickstart the offense and draw those fouls and just generate easy points and get himself going. Couple of steals, couple of rebounds, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a pretty high score and maybe even flirting with the 5X number at 4X there. He does have that upside. So that's where I'm looking as Butler, and I'm glad to kind of hear that because I was starting to pull away, not necessarily from the take of them winning, but the game in general from a DFS perspective. I'm a little bit worried about it. All right, moving on, we have Arizona versus Princeton. You have had a very good read on Arizona, other than our guy Forsty, friend of the show, who that's his team. I don't particularly like their guards all that much. That's where my worry comes in with them. They have this kind of weird matchup with Princeton. The Princeton guys are all priced super high up, so I want to get your take there because Tosin Abubuam is 8'8", and he's a fantastic player, great rates, puts up these high scores, but my God, using him at almost 9K against that Arizona front court seems like an absolute death trap. But I find myself kind of intrigued about using him. Everybody else, like Matt Aloko, Ryan Langborg, all those guys over 6K, even that feels a little bit off to me. But for some reason, I have this nagging feeling that Princeton is going to perform a little bit here from a DFS perspective. So let's get your thought process, because Arizona, like I said, you've had a pretty good read on them this year between picking the Tubelis Ballo, conundrum for the first half of the season. Ballo kind of fell off here, and I guess he has a broken bone. But that first half of the season, you did a fantastic job of picking the right one. So where's your head at here for this one?
Yeah, so it's always scary getting a Ivy League school in the first round of the tournament, right? They're coached very well. They have really smart players. They run great offense. They run great sets. And Princeton, like you said, does have a unicorn in Tosin there, who is an absolute stud and can fill up the stat sheet in all categories. They run the offense through him. It kind of reminds me a lot of Derek Walker from Nebraska, right?
Yep.
They have very similar skill set, and the offense runs completely through them. Ball touches his hands every time down the court. But I look at their roster, and who the hell is going to guard Tubelis and Ballo on that Princeton team? I think it's just going to be way too overwhelming, especially at the tempo Arizona wants to play at. Christi is going to get the ball. Tubelis is going to put his head down, run to the front of the rim, and I don't know if anybody on Princeton can stop that. So for me, I think Tubelis and Ballo both can have monster games here. They're projected to score 85 points. Both of them are very much in my player pool. And then if you look down the price pool, Christi is probably at the cheapest price we've ever seen him at 5,200. With Arizona scoring 85 points and his assist rate when he's healthy, to me, that's somebody that you need to look at. And even Pell Larson, right? He can fill up the stat sheet in all categories. Arizona's going to score 85 points. He's only 5,500. Pell Larson's in play for me as well. So I actually do like the Arizona side quite a bit here. And like you said, on the Princeton side, everybody's just priced a little too high here. I think they maybe can compete in the beginning of the game, but Arizona runs away at the end. And yeah, I like Tubelis, I like Ballo, I like Christi, and I also like Larson in a game where Arizona can put up a lot of points.
Yeah, and this isn't like you think of Princeton, the slow pace and pass it around and milk the clock. Like they're not there super fast or anything, but they've had some games where they've been involved in some higher scoring affairs. At Yale, they had a couple of high scoring games. Dartmouth. So there's been some opportunity. Yeah, there's been some Ivy League's actually been a pretty, we didn't get them a lot on the slate. Like we didn't have the mid-major Friday as much this year, but Ivy League was a fun league to watch this year. And yeah, that's a perfect player to compare Tosin to, because he has that high assist rate, 32.4%, and just has such a strong game. He might even be a little bit better. I mean, he plays lesser competition, but he might even be a little bit better as total, well-roundedness than Derek Walker, honestly.
He can score a little better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. He can score better than Walker and put up, more consistently those points instead of, because Walker seems like he kind of falls into the background a little bit behind Lord Tominanga. But yeah, I like the idea of using Tosin. I was thinking to myself when this pairings were announced, if he would have came out like 7K, they put the pricing out pretty fast, but if he would have been like 7K, it would have been a real decision for me. But damn, at almost 9K, it's just really tough. And I don't particularly want to use anybody but him on this roster. I just don't trust Langborg or Loco all that much. So yeah, I'm probably staying away from Princeton. And I feel like I almost have to get somebody from Arizona. I get that salary and I'm able to get a pay up, and maybe I'm able to fit Wilson in there nice and snug, and I have room for one more. Definitely seems like Tubelis is the route I want to go. That price on Ballo is so appealing at 7.6, but man, just, he's been playing. It's been a little rough for him. He's had some nice games. Then we come out that he has that injury, and I just feel a little bit nervous about him, even though that price is appealing. So I think I lean Tubelis if you can afford it. And then that's kind of where my head is at and where I'm going. The Arizona guards are cheap, I have to admit, but my trust level hasn't been very high with them. And yeah, Christi, he went like 2 years ago when he was like playing 5 minutes a game. He was like mid price, right? But since he's been playing a regular role, yeah, I think you're right. This is probably the lowest price that he's been. All right, moving along, I see our guy Corey, the Hogs fan, super fan. He's ready for the Arkansas talk here. So we're going to move on to this game. Illinois, a team that you're familiar with, and Scott TSU is a big fan of theirs. A lot of inconsistencies with them, but they have some intriguing pieces for this game. And then, of course, we have the Arkansas side of things, and this is where the must bust comes in. And might we see him throw a different starting lineup out there? Maybe this is where Jordan Walsh comes back into play. I'm really kind of leery about all the lineup shuffling he does in the front court. It makes me really just want to focus any and all exposure to the Arkansas side, to mostly Nick Smith, who I think at 7-3 is a pretty strong price for him and easily fittable in there in terms of how you want to construct. Even if you want to go a little bit more on the studs and scrubs side, even on this tighter price slate, Nick Smith just makes a lot of sense to me at 7-3 because we know he's going to chuck a lot of shots up going up against Illinois. That could be a really fun matchup between him and your guy Terry Shannon. I could see them trading buckets back and forth, and you know how that goes when guys go mano a mano. It's a really fun thing to watch. So Smith is where my head is at. The pricing tells me that our guy Devo Davis is where we want to go at 5-6, and the price is certainly mitigating some of that risk with him. The minutes appear to be safe now. He won't necessarily get yanked by any means, but am I really going to be comfortable trusting him even at the 5-6 price? It's tough for me. I wish they would have, with everyone else's prices, they seemingly jacked up. I wish they would have just taken him to 7K so I don't have to have this conversation. It's kind of like with Javon Quinterly. We didn't really talk about him, but back when he was 4 or 5, it's like, jack that guy's price up so I don't have to worry. He's played 37 and 40 minutes in each of his last 2 games, so he's going to be on the floor for the entire game. He should theoretically be able to pay off. He has a pretty solid rates across the board. He's been racking up the steals. He's been getting buckets. He's adding rebounds now. He's just doing a lot of different things for this team, and he's shooting about 36% from long range on volume, 125 attempts. So hitting those threes now and playing the third most minutes pretty much on the team through the total season behind Ricky Council and Anthony Black. With Nick Smith in the mix, you would think that he would have lost some of those minutes, but he really hasn't. Mostly usage and some of that PT has come out of Council here and again. Council not quite as strong as plays he usually is at 6K. And even a guy like Anthony Black, who I've heard some people speaking about him because he continues to play pretty well. But I would rather personally go with Nick Smith, who, even though he's missed a ton of this season, I just trust more NBA caliber talent and is going to have to take a ton of shots here. Now, if I don't go Nick Smith and I don't go Devo Davis, does that mean I have to go with one of the Mitchells? And I just don't know if I can handle that either. Mikal Mitchell at 4K would be the high upside large field tournament play. And then Makai there sitting at 5'7". That might be a little bit high. We know over the years those guys have extremely high foul rates. The minutes are going to be up and down. However, if we can get a 30-minute game out of one of them, they will definitely blow the doors off the slate and become an optimal play. It's just a matter of if that's going to happen. I can't guarantee that by any means because of the foul rate. And they're going up against a front court that isn't afraid to get physical at times with Coleman Hawkins, Mayer, and my guy Dane Danger. So it's a little bit of a riskier game for me. Normally, Arkansas games are quite fun and mini stackable, but this slate is so large, I don't want to get too invested into one game in case it does dud out. So I'm looking mainly at Nick Smith here for me, at least in terms of my main lineup. On the Illinois side, I noticed that price on Dane Danger at 5.5, and I immediately just want to click him in, but I have to really pull myself back. I have this tendency to really want to play my guys no matter what the matchup, no matter what the price. His foul rate is high. We know that. He's going to be on the court, I think, for 20-plus minutes if he can stay on the court. And it's just a matter of him versus the Mitchells who's going to get into foul trouble first. If it's not him and he sees 22 to 25 minutes, I do think he flirts with a 30 fantasy point game against Arkansas here. I really do think he's in a nice spot here to put up a big score if he can just stay on the floor. And he's his own worst enemy at times with that. Not really looking at anyone like Ty Rodgers, Melendez, Jaden Epps is down there at 4.3. I just feel like if it's not Danger, then I'm playing Nick Smith or I'm looking away. And maybe that's a mistake here because your guy Terry Shannon sitting there at 8-1. He's going to have to carry a big part of the offensive load as well. What are you doing with this game? Because there's some options in this one that I know you've used throughout the season.
This actually isn't my favorite game from a fantasy perspective. We've seen Muss turn up the defensive screws in tournament time the last few years. We've seen them almost shut down the Zags, pretty much shut down the Zags last year. And I've watched a lot of Arkansas this year. I think our boy Corey can agree that I think that this Arkansas team has the best group of individual defenders maybe in the country. I mean, Jordan Walsh locks up. Anthony Black locks up. We know Devo Davis locks up. As a unit, I don't know if they're one of the best defensive teams in the country, but individually, they are all fantastic defenders. And I think they're going to force a lot of isolation situations for Mayer and Shannon, who are capable of scoring in isolation, but I don't think that bodes a lot of success for this Illinois team, especially especially a team that's been pretty shaky recently. So I really like Arkansas here. I actually am going to disagree with you that I don't think Nick Smith is the best play here. I'd much rather pay an extra 100 and play a guy in Anthony Black that can fill up the stat sheet in all categories and not just score like Nick Smith, right? Because we know Nick Smith's going to be there with the shot volume, but he can score 22 points, maybe only get 2 or 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and end up with 27 fantasy points, where Anthony Black can score 10 points, but he gets 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 blocks, 3 steals, and he's sitting there at 10 fantasy points higher just because of his peripherals. So, Illinois does like to get up and down a little bit. Arkansas wants to get up and down a little bit. I think there's more peripherals to go around for Anthony Black than somebody like Nick Smith in this matchup. I think Nick Smith's upside is higher, so I'd much rather play him in a GPP, but if I'm playing a main or a cash, I'm going to be looking for Anthony Black over Nick Smith. Just my opinion. And you're right. You're absolutely right about Devo Davis. He is really cheap. If he's getting the minutes, he has a pretty good usage rates, pretty good rebounding rate, pretty good assist rate, really good steal rate. But man, he is scary to play because he can make one mistake and Musk can immediately put him to the bench. And then your lineup's toast. So I do really like the price there at 5,600. He's definitely my player pool. I'll be looking there. And I think that's pretty much it. I have a little bit of interest in Jordan Walsh because he's been playing really well lately at 5,200. But for me, I think it's Devo 1 and Anthony Black 2 in this game and not much else.
Yeah, I just like the fact that Nick Smith is probably going to put up 20 plus attempts, but you're right. If he goes 4 for 20, right. If he goes 4 for 20, then he's not going to get there, but maybe he shoots 12 for 23 or 10 for 23 like he did against Kentucky, and he put up 25 real. Of course, he had 4 steals in that game, so it jacked his salary or his fantasy point scores up. But I don't know, man. Black's good, don't get me wrong, but I just love the shot volume there with Nick Smith. But if he scores 19 real and nothing else, then of course it's going to be a bust. I think overall it's just a game that's not going to make it into my main lineup. But I do lean to the Smith side there. But I like your take on it too. So people have the 2 different versions there they can look to. All right, moving on to for me a much more fantasy friendly game, and I think for everybody, whenever Iowa's on the slate, we look to stack for and against them depending on their opponent, and they have one here in Auburn that is definitely a fun matchup all around. Auburn 10-0 in the first round all time. That was a stat I couldn't get off on the mean streets this morning, and so I had to get it off here because I went and searched for it and I did all this work. So, and Fran McCaffrey has never made it to the Sweet 16 in 12 tries with Iowa. So a couple of stats there that I wanted to get off. But Auburn, so I like Auburn to win the game based off of that. But I also like Auburn because Iowa's defense we know is just they're fantasy friendly as it gets. Now that means to me, Janai Broome, who has been my guy for a long time, even back when he was at, the Moorhead and everything, 8.6 is a lot of salary to pay. And if we're going to Jalen Wilson and we're looking at, Tubelis, and I'm sure there's going to be some, Filipowski talk. There's not going to be a lot of other room to get Broome in there. But for me personally, I do feel like Broome is a priority play just because I know how advantageous this matchup against Iowa really can be. I would have preferred a lower 8K range price, as everyone would have, but at least with the tight pricing, it'll keep his rostership to a reasonable level, meaning 10 to 15% as opposed to 40% at 7-8 or something. But he's been fantastic. There was talk about him when he transferred up. He hadn't done it against upper tier programs and blah blah blah. That hasn't been a problem. He's just dominated pretty much everyone he's come across in the SEC. Now he gets that Iowa front court that he should be able to smack around. As far as his rates go, they're extremely impressive. 29% shot rate, 27% usage rate, a 12.5% offensive rebounding rate, which is top 75. A block rate of almost 10%, shoots a little bit of 3 sometimes, but mainly, he's banging on down low, draws over 4 fouls per 40. Does have a 4.6 fouls called for 40 rate on him, so there is that problem at times. If I was driving to the hole, maybe we see a little bit of issues there, but I really like him to dominate on the offensive end, and he has these really good post move sets that he can use, and just does a ton of athleticism, and he knows how to control the glass against any type of opponent. So this is one where I really like Broom and think he's well worth it. On the guard side, I think we can look there too. And if you don't have that salary, say you're going up to the Wilsons and the Tubelis, and that's just not going to work for you, but you want Auburn, then you can definitely look to like our guy Flanny. You know, he's 5'7". I think this is a great matchup for him to get up there and rack up points, maybe even get some steals, turning Iowa over. Wendell Green, one of your guys at 7'5". I think that's an excellent place. A little more on the GP side for me. I don't mind using him in Maine, but I think he has the upside for a 40 in this spot. I really like him. And then if you can't get to any of those guys either, then you have Jalen Williams, who I think people are still a little slow to realize just how good of a season he's actually had, and kind of the forgotten man of the group, usually the fourth option, but he's gotten up to the second and third in different games. And when Broom does get into foul trouble or he's not effective, which doesn't happen very often, Jalen Williams has been the guy to step up. He can hit threes. He can grab a bunch of boards. He even showed off some passing ability against Tennessee when he had 7 assists. Not necessarily going to see that very often, but he's in such an improved player, definitely one of the more improved players throughout the season, going from a total role player or a lower end role player to somebody that you can rely on and actually consider at some points paying $7K for him and paying that price off somehow against Tennessee. So he's actually a really good option as well, somebody that is a little more affordable if you can't get there, and he falls in that price range that I always talk about for a last guy in. So I'm on board with a ton of different Auburn guys here. You even have Katie Johnson. He's been a really tough option to use, even when he's priced below 5K. They have him right at 5K coming off the Arkansas game in which he put up 30. He has scored 30-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games, which includes one against Alabama, in which he was fantastic from behind the arc. Somebody who's going to take a lot of shots, very high usage. Pretty interesting in this one, too. I think at 5K, you could certainly pay that off. So if you're making multiple lineups, variations of a game stack here are going to be very, very advantageous. On the Iowa side, you don't have to limit yourself. You know, usually I'm looking at Chris Murray or Philip Rabracha. I still like Rabracha more just because there's a huge price discount there. I know Murray's got the much bigger upside, but a lot of times it ends up being 10 or less points difference, and I can live that and make that up somewhere else for such a steep discount. So I do like Rabracha a bit more here. He's another really improved player. If he can stay out of foul trouble, he's somebody, playing 35 minutes potentially that will definitely see a 4X number as long as he doesn't get into foul trouble. And of course, we know Chris Murray, not quite Keegan level, but definitely putting up some big numbers. Like I said, at 9.4, it's going to be harder for me to get there, but he has the bigger upside, the biggest upside of anyone on Iowa. And then we got to shout out Tony Perkins sitting there at 7.4, another really improved player. He really wasn't a factor for me much of the time he's been there, but the last half of the conference season, he really stepped up. We saw him put up back-to-back 50s against IU and Michigan State, and he's really not settled down since then. 31, 23. He's had some pretty solid outings. It's definitely jacked up his price a bit. There's going to be some opportunities to force Auburn into some turnovers, especially on the perimeter with the pace, and that's something that he's very, very good at and can jack up his score. 2 or 3 steals later, you might see him eclipse 35 here at the 7.4, especially if it's a game where he's hitting a couple of threes and getting to the line and just generating a ton of points all around. So those are your 3 main Iowa guys. You have some cheapies potentially if you want to get involved with the McCaffreys. I typically don't. And then Peyton Sandford, who I really want to be good and a consistent option. That 5K is intriguing for him. But every time I think he's trending towards breaking out and then finally realizing his full potential, his minutes get stripped and he's back down to ground zero. So I'm a little bit leery of using him or a guy like Aaron Eulis, even though I think both are really good. They just don't have the development yet to be consistent options for your main team lineup. So I suspect it's a popular game, Mike, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. And I agree with you on the Auburn side here. How you beat this Auburn team is if you slow the game down, you pack it in, and you force them to shoot threes because they are not good catch and shoot 3-point shooters at all. But Iowa is definitely not going to do that. Iowa wants to get up and down. You know how Fran wants to play. They want to space you out. They want to get out in transition. And like we've seen in the years past, I mean, that defense is Swiss cheese most of the time. So I think this is a really good game environment for the Auburn guards to get up and down the court, force some turnovers. We've seen them strive in more chaotic environments. Another thing to mention, Walt, is that this game is in Birmingham, which is 2 hours from Auburn's campus. So you could get a little bit of a home field for the Tigers here. And you've seen Wendell Green and Katie Johnson just really feed off that crowd energy. They play much better at home. Katie Johnson just gets in these zones sometimes where he just wants to take every single shot. We saw it in the Alabama game. So yeah, I'm looking at Wendell Green and Katie Johnson probably the most here out of anybody. But I also agree with you on the Johnny Broom call, or I should say Janai Broom. Iowa has nobody who can really guard him. He's too quick for Rebraca down low. And I don't think Chris Murray wants any part of his physicality. He can fill up the stat sheet and put up a lot of fantasy points with his block and steal upside. So he is right there up there. He's right up there with the Jalen Wilsons and the Tubelis, and we'll talk about Filipowski. He's up there with all those guys as far as a pay up. So I do like him. But, I like these Auburn guards as well. And on the Iowa side, you can't rule out Chris Murray. I mean, he could put up a 30-10 in this matchup, even in a loss. I think it's going to be really back and forth, and I think there's going to be a lot of points scored. So I definitely have a lot of interest in this game. I think a lot of people will. It's just trying to choose the right spot is the difficult part.
Yeah, this is the one where if you're doing the mini max or you're in that 50K to first, like just running different variations of stacks between, 3 players, 4, sometimes 5. You could even run like a 5-man stack and something like this and have it work out. I know a lot of people are anti-stack when it comes to college basketball, but honestly, for me, throughout the course of the years, it's been a really profitable strategy. I've been at my best when I stack, and this is one that I want to have a ton of exposure to. There are letdown potentials for both teams, but yeah, the nice call there of Auburn playing close to home. I just think that they're going to put up a big score, and we've had so much success targeting against Iowa throughout the course of the last few seasons that it's just a great spot, and it's a really good matchup, and I'm looking forward to watching this game for sure. All right, moving along here, we have Duke versus Oral Roberts. We're making good time, believe it or not. This is a game. I'll start with you here. Well, let me just give my spiel real quick. They've been here before, so that's great. They don't have Kevin O'Banner this time, but Max Asmus back. Carlos Jurgens, who I think is a really well-traveled role player that has these games that he really steps up, and Kareem Thompson. So they've got guys who won't get rattled in the moment and have the potential to pull this 12-5 upset. And this is one, the Charleston game, I'm very anti, them winning this one, but I do lean heavily towards the Oral Roberts side. And I did get that bet in there a day or two ago before there was looking like on some books a little bit of movement, and we might see a lot more start to come over to Oral Roberts before that game starts. But they did a nice job of pricing up the 2 primary options in Max Asmus, who's priced at almost 10K. That'll keep his ownership down, and Connor Vanover at 8-2, which Vanover's been great. Don't get me wrong. He's been very, very good. He couldn't get it done he was good at Cal, but couldn't keep up in the SEC. I have some major concerns about him going up against the talent level of Duke and them just doing what happened in the SEC, getting him out there and running, the screens and very active out. And he's just going to I just feel like he's going to get lost, and that might make his minutes down from like 32 down to the low to mid 20s. And if that happens, I just don't know that he's going to be able to pay off that high price. So I have some concerns there about him. The matchup with Lively isn't horrible for him by any means, but if they start, really forcing him to move around a lot, there could be trouble. Love Max Asmus. I think he's a great large field tournament play. I even think if you really wanted to force him in, because if you think Oral Roberts is going to win this game, it's going to be on his back. At the end of the day, as good as Vanover is, Thompson, Jurgens, great role players, but if they're going to win, it's going to be Max Asmus taking it to the rack repeatedly, hitting key threes, putting up a really big number. Like he's going to score 30 plus real points in this game if they're going to have any real shot of beating this Duke team. And I know it's a red hot Duke team, and there's a lot of talk about how great they are and whatever. I don't care about any of that. I think this Oral Roberts team is exactly the kind of team that Duke has struggled with in the past. I know it's a different staff and all that, but this is a team that can make a run in March. They've already done it with these pieces before, and this Duke team to me is susceptible. They're not a veteran group besides Roach. There's a lot of youngsters, and they might get lost in the lights there at the first half. And if we see Oral Roberts punch them in the mouth early and kind of keep that lead throughout, I do think we see Oral Roberts end up winning this game and definitely covering by far. And ultimately, a guy like Max Asmith putting up a 50 is a real possibility here on 30 real points and whatever he can do in those other categories. But we haven't seen him with the big scoring the last couple of games, yes, but the shot attempts haven't been as high as we've seen maybe in the past from him or in that tournament in particular. This would be a game where I could see 20 plus shots from him. It's a high price to pay though, Mike. So what do you think?
Yeah, I'm on the same side as you, Walt. I really like Oral Roberts in this matchup. I mean, they're a veteran team. Like you said, they've been here before. I think a lot of people have a little bit of recency bias towards this Duke team. I know I'm wearing their jersey, but that's just for fun. That's not because I support them by any means. I think there's a lot of recency bias for this Duke team because we've seen them in a large sample size struggle a good chunk of this year. They're very young. They have a first-year coach. They don't defend ball screens very well. This Oral Roberts offense runs very similarly to the way Miami operates with Isaiah Wong at the head of the snake. You have Max Asmith here, and Miami, both times they played Duke this year, put up a ton of points. So I think Duke, there isn't enough things in this matchup that Duke can struggle, especially defensively. This is a Duke team that has been playing pretty slow and slower than they typically play. They play very conservatively defensively, which in the past they're usually a very aggressive defense, but not so this year. They don't really force any turnovers. I think this is going to turn into an execution match. It's going to be Asmith, hitting shots and executing against that Duke defense versus, Filipowski and then pounding the offensive glass on the offensive side of the ball and that way. And for me, I'm always going to side with the guards, so I think Asmith can get this one done. From a fantasy perspective, I agree with you. Asmith is definitely in play. I think he's going to take over 20 shots. He's going to have the ball in his hands every single time down the court. They're going to need him to put up a big number to win this game. I think he can do it. Am I excited about paying 9.9? No. And there's a lot of options up in that range. So he's definitely up there, but am I making him a priority? Probably not. It just kind of has to see how my roster construction turns out. And another guy I really like in this game on the Duke side is Filipowski. I don't think anybody can handle him on the Oral Roberts side. Duke's been going to him and leaning on him all year. I think he can crush them on the offensive glass. We saw when they played, I think it was Arkansas 2 years ago. It was Justin Smith had a huge game against them when they beat them. And I think it's a similar outcome here for Filipowski. So he could have a big game here at 9K. I think he's right in that range with Broom and Tubelis and all of those guys there. So I'll be looking to have some Filipowski exposure. And then one more guy that I was a little interested in the low 5K range was Tyrese Proctor. He's been coming on as of late. A big reason why they've been playing well down the stretch. He's been playing over 30 minutes. He's still down here 5,400. I think he has the ability to not just score, but fill up the stat sheet in multiple categories. I think he's a pretty decent look here at that price point as well. But other than that, oral guys are priced way too high, like we mentioned. So that's really the only interest I have.
Yeah, I like the Proctor call. Proctor and Mitchell, I know he hasn't been that great either, but those two prices kind of stuck out as a way to get some Duke exposure. I still think Mitchell is going to come around. Like next year is going to be a big explosion for him. I actually kind of like that he's kind of been lower, end on the production this season. But Proctor's one that feels like a cash play or main team play, but I am also leery because we've had Duke cheapies before in decent spots, and it's kind of hit or miss if they produce. And a lot of that just his flip goes off and everybody else just kind of does their thing or whatever, but it's not enough. It is interesting too that Derek Whitehead is sitting there at 4-1, but minutes haven't been there, fouls have been there.
Been playing.
He did have a nice game against Miami, but he hasn't been playing enough, and the 4-1, like whoever takes a chance there may get rewarded, but certainly not a main team play. I do like on the Oral Roberts side, besides Asmith, looking at a guy like Carlos Jurgens, because he's one of those guys that doesn't have a ton of athleticism, and he's you look at him and you're like, well, that guy's not gonna be able to play, but he has a way about him. He's got a toughness.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's really actually pretty damn good, and he's skilled, and he's got this way about him. Like you'll be watching the game and you'll see him make some plays that are not necessarily in the stat sheet, and you'll be like, I guess he didn't have that great of a game. And you'll look and be like, wow, he put up 25 fantasy points. When did that happen? He's like that type of player. And at 5'3", I think he could slowly come along and suddenly pay off, 4 or 5x at that number. So if you want to get some exposure to Oral Roberts, maybe you play that, one of those secondary slates, and you're looking to get somebody that's going to be sub 2% owned. I do think Juergens can pay off 5'3" in a big way. He had a game earlier, just like, a couple weeks ago, where he's over 34. He scored 24 plus in 3 of his last 5. He's been taking a lot more shots too, but where he's really at his best is when he's rebounding well, which he's able to do. And he's just a fearless type guy. So I wanted to call attention to Juergens as a kind of a nice alt team play. All right, moving along here, we have Colgate versus Texas. It's a shame because I really wanted Colgate. If they would have switched with Kennesaw State, that would have been ideal, because I think we really could have got into talking about using Colgate. You hit on Texas, last year, and you were maybe a little bit early, but they're coming to fruition the way that you thought. And even though the prices on some of these Colgate guys are high, I do think that they're in play. Certainly a guy like Tucker Richardson at 8.2, or even Keegan Records at 6.9. I think both have some ability here to still pay off, but I am certainly worried after seeing the way that Texas dumpstered the Kansas offense, especially a guard like Tucker Richardson. I'm a bit concerned that maybe he gets handcuffed and that 8.2 might go to waste. We do have a value option in Oliver Lynch-Daniels, who's sitting there at 4.9. He's maybe the most realistic option that you can use in a main lineup. And I might be putting too much respect here on Texas, but I don't even feel that great about him. He isn't a great 3-point shooter. He lives out there, he's actually one of the top 2 3-point shooters in the country per percentage, shooting almost 51%. And that's on volume, 153 attempts, believe it or not. Like just about automatic when he gets the shot off, regardless of you're in his hit base or not. So he's definitely interesting in that regard. But this matchup against Texas, it just seems stylistically like it's not that great for them. And I'm just kind of worried about the Colgate guys. I would have loved to have been able to use them in mini stacks more in a real lineup, but a throwaway lineup, sure. It's the Texas side that I'm really interested in, because I don't think, when people look at Texas, they're going to think of Marcus Carr, of course. He's been, good at times. We know how volume he can put up a big score at any time. The 7.6 it's an okay price. I think he's projecting a bit high for me. I don't think that I agree with those projections. I do look back to our guy, Tyrese Hunter, who slipped back under the 5K range. I'm a believer that Iowa State version of him, that is a guy that's, able to contribute in all categories, playing 30 plus minutes a game. I think that version of him is here to stay, and I'm excited about the opportunity to possibly use him as a main team guy at 4.7. Timmy Allen, they've looked good without Timmy Allen, by the way, but Timmy Allen coming back into the mix throws off Jabari Rice. I think at 6.9, it's going to be hard to really play him, depending on how many minutes Allen jumps back into his normal role. Now, Dylan Disu has been the guy that's been paying us off very handsomely. His price has shot up to 6.8, and I know that's going to turn a lot of people away, but I don't think that's necessarily the right move, even with Timmy Allen coming back. Going up against this Colgate team, they're not, offensive rebounding rate is not great. They have shown a propensity to be able to rebound, but they're going up against a caliber of player in Disu that they warmly wouldn't see at the, Patriot League level. If we're getting the Vanderbilt, I mentioned the Iowa State version of Tyrese, but if we're getting that Vanderbilt SEC version of Disu, and they're going to give him somewhere between 21 to 25 minutes, and that might be a big ask of me to try to get that minute share from Disu. But if he does get those kind of minutes again, he's getting 30 against this team. I'm fairly confident that he's paying off the 6.8 with those minutes against this front court. You're expecting me to believe that Keegan Records is going to shut down a guy like Dylan Disu? There's no shot. They're going to throw Ryan Moffitt on him part of the time. There's just no shot. So I'm really high on this individual matchup for Disu. Where it gets tricky is with Timmy Allen coming back into the mix. We know that they're going to force Christian Bishop minutes on us. I do think that Brock Cunningham and Dylan Mitchell are probably on the outside looking in, because Cunningham's really not that good. He paid off a couple of times for us. And then Dylan Mitchell, I think the moment might be a little bit too big for him. So I think there's still a path for Disu to get those mid-20s minutes. But that is the one hang up I have about just plugging him in. But I think it's a mistake to just go and say, oh, he's 6'8", Timmy Allen's back. He's a no-go. Because then you're going to turn around and fade him in all your lineups, and then you'll look at it and be like, damn, he just had a double-double, 20 and 12. They gave him the 25 minutes, and I didn't have any exposure. So I really like Disu here as a very low-owned play. He's been paying off for us. It's just a minutes thing for me. If you're not comfortable there, then going 4-7 with Tyrese Hunter makes the most sense to me personally, because I do think he's going to end up with some steals here. He'll get some buckets if he can contribute to other categories. The 4-7, it's not an insurmountable amount for him to pay off like it was in mid-January. He's back to playing like the version of him that we're used to. So what do you think, man? Texas is your guys. You've had a pretty good read on them, even if it was early, but you were ultimately maybe proven right on them.
Yeah, I wish they were playing like this last year, because I would have made so much more money. But that's besides the point. I do really like this Colgate team, but man, I really wish that they got matched up with like an Xavier instead of Texas here. They are just completely overmatched against the athleticism that Texas can roll out. They have a ton of dudes. Timmy Allen's back. It's just not a great matchup for them. So, Lynch Daniels is interesting at 4,900. I actually think a lot of people probably are going to look at his box scores and play him. But I'm with you. I don't know if I want to play him. I think I'd rather play some other guys in that range if I'm looking towards my main lineup. And yeah, it's tough to get some of these Colgate guys. On the Texas side, I think Marcus Carr is fairly priced, but it makes me a little nervous that his shots have gone down a little bit recently as Texas has been playing better. So I don't know if there's a little bit of correlation there, and he keeps his shot attempts down. So it's I think there's better options than Marcus Carr. I like your Disu call, but I am not a huge fan of rolling him out at 6,800. I mean, that's strictly a GPP play in my opinion. But the dude has been a beast recently. It looks like they have unleashed him. You're absolutely right. He looks like back in his old Vandy days when he was putting 30 and 15 on Kentucky as a freshman. He's dealt with a lot of injuries, but he looks pretty healthy now. And it's great to see him, because he's a major factor when he's running around like that, blocking shots, grabbing old boards, put back dunks. He looks great. And on the Colgate side, they have nobody who can match up with him. They have nobody who can match up with Timmy Allen. They have nobody who can match up with Christian Bishop. So even Christian Bishop, I'm a little interested in here. Overall, it's more the value guys on the Texas side. Like you said, Tyrese Hunter, I think, can have a pretty good game. He's pretty safe. If you're looking at cash games, Tyrese Hunter at 4,700. I actually like him probably a little better than Lynch Daniels. I even like Christian Bishop. Even if he's going to get 20 minutes, he could put up one of his ceiling games here against a Colgate front court that is a little soft and slow, I would say, compared to the intensity that Texas is going to bring. So yeah, those are really the guys I'm interested in.
Yeah, and that's just it. Like Keegan Records has a nice block rate and solid rebounding rate, but it's just you have to. That's where it kind of makes you got to really dive a little bit deeper and say, okay, here's the level of competition he sees. And there's some good teams, good players in the Patriot, but let's not kid ourselves and think there's Texas level guys that they're seeing on a nightly basis there. And that's where I think Records is going to get steamrolled. And while Colgate is the best, one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country, they don't necessarily defend it all that well. That's where maybe, it does make sense to go to the cheaper Tyrese Hunter, who should be able to get some shots off. I would have said Rice, but with Allen back, that obviously worries me. And then, Marcus Carr. I've seen a few places talking up Carr, and they're being quite aggressive with it, but I don't know. I'm not there with him, unfortunately.
He's in my player pool, but he's not a priority for me.
Yeah. All right. Next game, Boise State versus Northwestern. Man, other than having my guy Big Shot Shaver in the game, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that there comes a time in this one where he will be required to take a big shot to win the game. That would be awesome. But I don't know, man. You're my my Big Ten Conference guy. You know this team well with Northwestern. Their defense has been solid. Boise State's defense has been solid. This does not seem like a healthy fantasy environment at all. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the applied total, it's the lowest by far in the whole slate. Northwestern has had a great year, and the reason that they've gotten to this point is because of their defense, not because of Boo Buie. No matter who tells you that, it's not because of him, it's because of their defense, especially their interior defense. So if you're looking for any of the big guys in Boise, please run away from that. Northwestern post traps, they've been post trapping all year. They're going to double the post. They kind of, tailored their defense off of how like a Houston or Virginia or Rutgers plays, which has led to a lot of success for them this year. And then on the other side, what Boise's going to do is they actually run a lot of deep drop coverage, which if you look at all the teams in the Big Ten, that's all they do. So Boo Buie is actually pretty familiar with that. So he could have a decent game. I don't know if I want to pay that much for him with other guys in that range. But, I could see him having a decent game. But yeah, I mean, fantasy wise, it's really tough. The only guy that I really think is underpriced here is Agbo on the Boise State side at 4,800. That's just a little too cheap for him, but man, is it scary to play somebody in this game. Well, even if it's a value guy. So I'll be looking to him maybe as like a last man in. You have Hunter in that range, you have Bishop in that range, you have Lynch Daniels in that range. It's tough, but I mean, Agbo's in my my player pool, but man, this game is going to be in the low 60s, high 50s. It's going to be a rock fight. It's going to be tough to get there.
It's definitely brutal. Agbo's cheap enough, that sub 5K you mentioned, or he's a good enough 3-point shooter where if he's able to get some shots off and knock them down, like he'll flirt with paying that off. But I don't know how much over that he'll get. And the only other player I would maybe look at, and he's always cheap and he always seems to project well, but we know Ty Berry, regardless of what the computer might tell you, Ty Berry just he rarely gets there. It seems I've done my time with him. Passed him around in dynasty leagues, and yeah, even at the 4.8, that's probably just the price he should be at this point. All right, moving on, we have the Houston side of things here, going up against NKU, the great North Kentucky. They just continue to win the horizon, even during years where they're supposed to be, down years for them. They keep on winning, so good on them. But they win a date with Houston. And regardless of how Houston just looked in the conference final, and I know there's a lot to be made, being made about the injuries. There's two teams on here we're going to get into about injuries, but a lot of people, hitting the panic button. Oh my God, Marcus Sasser pulled his groin. It's the end of the world. Oh my God, what do we do? Houston's going to lose, abandon ship. Like, let's not get too excited. It's a groin injury where it's not going to be nagging necessarily. What it's going to happen. Like there might be a cut or something, and you'll feel a pull, right? But it's not as if he's going to be necessarily limping around. I don't think. Now, what I do think happens in this game is that Houston has a comfortable lead throughout, and Sasser plays. But you see like 15 minutes, maybe even less. Like there's no need to shove him out there for 35 minutes. And if they come out flat again and NKU's hitting threes and suddenly it's a Virginia panicking against the 16 situation, then yeah, Sasser's going to probably have to play because that's your life on the line. But I don't think that we see that situation happen. I think Houston's defense will hold up here with or without Sasser. They got a little bit excited. They got overwhelmed. Our guy, Kendrick Davis, went fucking nuts. Sorry, I had to curse about that one, but he's just phenomenal in the way they railroaded him. There's no Kendrick Davis on the NKU side. They've got some good players. Vincent is a guy that I really like. Marcus Warwick is very good, yes, and Trey Robinson can hit some shots, but there's no Kendrick Davis there. So I think that we see Houston kind of maybe not exert a ton of energy here, try to preserve what they can, get Sasser off the floor as fast as possible if he does play, and allow Manny Sharp and Terry Arsenault to get some of that valuable tournament experience with the whole world watching and get those jitters out, work them out, and let them play through some mistakes. I know Sampson isn't the best for doing that, but letting those young guys play through mistakes and getting that experience is going to help ultimately in case Sasser does aggravate something or somebody else goes down, God forbid. I think that this is a game that just Houston's not going to have their foot on the necks, and there will be no need to. So that really takes me off of most of them. I'm always talking about Tremont Mark. I had a chance to draft him just yesterday, but took Juwan Roberts. We talked about it, thought it was the right decision. I do think he's okay if you want to go there. 7-8 might, he's not going to torpedo your lineup, but I'm not sure we're going to see that big 30 plus fantasy score here. He could have like 15 to 16 rebounds, but I don't know if he'll have enough points really to balance that out. And 26 to 30, even at the 7-8, it's okay. And I know I said we need raw points here, but we can get that score from a few other spots, I think. Same thing with Jarris Walker. Shed, I almost never use Jamal Shed anymore. 8-4 is a little bit too high for me. I just don't have the luck that others have with them. I'm envious of those who do. If I wanted to use somebody, I would be looking to GPP, dart on the Terrence Arsenault or Emmanuel Sharp play. Sharp didn't look as good there without Sasser. Arsenault at least looked aggressive and not jittery. Sharp looked a little bit overmatched against Memphis for my taste, so that did worry me. but ultimately they need to get some playing time here in case they do need to use them, because there will be a situation in this tournament where somebody's going to get in foul trouble and they're going to have to go to one of those two guys, and that they can't just completely shit the bed. They got to perform. So I'm not really looking at this game too much from a DFS perspective personally. Is that the wrong move? What do you feel?
I do have a little bit of interest. I'm going to tell you why, Walt. So I actually do think Sasser plays. Even if it's limited, I think he's going to give it a go. From what I've been reading, that's what it sounds like. But, college basketball is crazy, so what the hell do I know? But anyway, so Northern Kentucky comes in here, and what do? They play zone. They play an extended 2-3 matchup zone. And Houston has seen zone this year. And who have they seen zone against? Your boys, Tulane. The Norse run a pretty similar defensive scheme than Tulane does, and they play in that extended 2-3 zone. And what is susceptible against the zone? There's two things, right? 3-pointers and offensive rebounds. And if you look back at the stats and who killed that Tulane team the last time they played, you look at Juwan Roberts. He had, I think, 26, 7, and 3 with a couple steals, a couple blocks. He probably had like 40-something fantasy points. Yeah. The Norse front court is softer than Tulane's front court. If they're going to be sitting in that zone all game, this Houston team, fourth best offensive rebounding team in the country, is going to be attacking that glass. And Juwan Roberts could have a monster game here. He is super risky. He fouls a lot. This team is super balanced, like you said. I don't know if there's going to be a ton of points in this game. I think the total is 122 or 121. But the matchup does favor somebody inside for Houston having a big game. I think it could be Juwan Roberts here at 7,800. Especially if Sasser isn't going to be the go-to guy. Maybe he gets a little bit more looks. Maybe Shed, tries to get it inside the zone instead of Sasser jocking up the huge threes, and then they can dump it off to Roberts for a couple lay-ins. I do like him in this matchup. So that's the only guy I really am looking to, but I wouldn't write this game completely off because I do think Roberts is just is up there with all of those forwards that we talked about before.
Yeah, if he's scoring too, definitely. It just seems like a game he's going to grab, like I mentioned, a lot of rebounds. And if like Sasser just plays those limited minutes, then maybe it can work out. I just wish he was a little bit cheaper for what the game is. But yes, there's going to be some production, and I think at this point he's become from the riskiest to maybe one of the more playable, because Walker, he's up and down as a youngster, and Mark, you can go these long stretches without scoring. And don't get me started.
He has those black upside too.
Yeah,
he really does.
I was gonna say, don't get me started on Shed, because we know what can happen with him. So yeah, Roberts may actually become the more safest of the options here on Houston now, which is the world we live in. All right, moving on here, we have Tennessee versus ULL. This is a really big point of contention for me, talking with my man Varnicus here. We've been talking lineups all day. We're really trying to figure this Tennessee side out, because got some good prices on guys that you like, and a guy that I did really well with last year in Triple J, not so much this season. And then we got to really decide on what's going to happen here with Jemiah Mashack. Is he going to get these big 30 minutes here and really crush it, or is there going to be a mistake, a foul, something that happens, and all of a sudden he plays 10 minutes? I really just am not sure which direction to go with this Vols team. So I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about them, because it's a team that's been hard to get a read on forever.
Yes, Walt, I have the exact same thoughts, and I don't know how much guidance I can give you, because there's let me put it this way. When I first went through my roster construction, was it on Tuesday maybe or Monday? I did have Triple J and Mashack both in my initial build, and I was like, wait a minute, I don't know if this makes sense. And looking closer, it is a big risk, because with Ziegler out, it's more been like a hot hand type of situation. Like, you could have Key come in here, hit a couple shots, and he's the one getting 35 minutes. I mean, you're always going to see Vescovi in there. Triple J, he's been a little inconsistent. I love his talent. I think he's a super good player, but with his injuries, he's been a little inconsistent. And if he's not hitting shots, you have Julian Phillips that comes off the bench that can take some minutes from him too. Overall, I do think it's a good spot for both of them. Definitely in your player pool. I think this is a fantastic matchup overall for Tennessee. I think Louisiana matches up horribly with this Tennessee team.
Agreed, 100%.
They want to, and the only way they can really score is in transition. With Tennessee gives up nothing in transition, and then they try to pound it into Jordan Jordan Brown down low. And Tennessee is one of the more stout interior defensive in the entire country. They allow nothing in the paint. You have to shoot over them, and that's not really what Louisiana's going to do. I mean, minus 10.5 was one of the first things I took when the lines came out for Tennessee. I think this is a great matchup for Tennessee. Even without Ziegler, a lot of people are writing them off because they don't have a point guard. I mean, they're still a really good team, and they still have a ton of talent. They're super deep. So from a fantasy perspective, I'm with you. I like Triple J. I like Meshack. Meshack's going to start. Triple J is going to start. But for my main team, man, like it's risky for me. It really is. I haven't fully made my my main team yet. I don't know if I'm going to have them in or not. It just scares me, Walt.
It's tough. It really does. It's really tough because Triple J, with the injuries, he just hasn't looked like himself. There's been a couple guys this year that just haven't come back all the way from injuries, and he's had this nagging stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if it came out after the season that he played through a lot more than we even realized, because last year you could really rely on him. Anytime he was under 7K, it was like auto lock. The dude's going to get you 3 steals. He's going to hit a couple shots. He's going to grab 7 rebounds. He'll even get a couple of dimes. Like, he was just locked in. And that's just, even at this price, which is intriguing for him, I just am so uncomfortable with it. And I'm glad to hear that you said this is a bad matchup for UL, because I'm seeing people picking them, and I'm seeing a lot of folks, like, well, Walt, you picked Tennessee last year and you pick them every year and they dog you. And it's like, well, I understand that. I'm not picking them to go far, but I certainly don't think they're going to lose this matchup. Like, I know Jordan Brown's great. He's got, P5 talent. He played time at Arizona and recruited in Nevada. We know the talent's there, and he's great, and he crushed it this season. But he's going to have to rely on a lot of foul, and Tennessee has this like almost seemingly endless amount of bigs to throw at him. So if they get guys into foul trouble, Mkwa and like flat Euros, like there's just going to be another big guy coming at him, and he's just going to wear down. I think they're just going to keep hacking and hacking. Yeah, and he's just going to eventually he's just going to be beaten up. So that's where I feel like not quite there. I think people will jump on him because of those rates and see 8.4. It's not a great price, but it's cheap enough that I think people will look there. And if people are picking, UL in their bracket, they may have a tendency. Sometimes people I've noticed will go to that team, right? Naturally, I think they're going to win. I want somebody from that team. And I tend to think it's a mistake here. I think the Vols, I mentioned how, they choke games out earlier when I was talking about SDSU. I think that's what happens here. They're just going to, if it's in the 40s and the 50s, they don't care. They're just going to get out of there. They're going to survive in advance, that old adage, and just, do what they do, and they'll hit some key shots and just make it to the other team is super uncomfortable. I thought it was interesting for Greg Williams at 4.5. We know talent's there from his, days in the P5 levels, but, his minutes kind of bounce around at times, and he's far from the sure thing either at 4.5, even though I do like that price for him. But yeah, I've talked to quite a few people, and everyone kind of feels the same. Like, we all want to use Meshack, but none of us, I think, want to put that final seal of approval and say, you know what, he's going to perform because he's going to get these minutes. Now, it comes with the caveat that if he does get the minutes we require, then yeah, he's a great play. But shoot, man, if it's a game where he's playing 12 to 13 minutes, it's just a total bummer. Even at that low price of 4.1, he can still do enough damage in your lineup to really hurt you in the long run. So
you're playing roulette between him and Key.
Yeah,
is what you're coming down to. So if you have the balls to do it, then that's great. He is a great play. He's probably one of the better value options out there, but it's a little scary.
Yeah, and there's some strategy stuff, like I won't have to get into it, but for head-to-head and Mania and stuff like that, like if you're expecting that to be popular, like that's a block play. But in your main for like tournaments and stuff, like yeah, I'm kind of pulling away if I can. All right, moving on here, we have Penn State versus Texas A&M. Seeing a lot of chatter about Cam Winter and Andrew Funk, first of all, and then of course Jalen Pickett, who is going to be on the floor for probably most, if not the entire game. 10-1's a lot to play for him, but we know he's, able to flirt with a triple-double, even in a matchup like this, where I think he can definitely do some damage. Texas A&M, have to respect them to a degree. Rates are phenomenal across the board. Top 5 assist rate for him. He has a 30% usage rate, 27% shot rate, 39% from long range. Like, Pickett's going to do everything, and he's just one of those guys where I know lately he's only been hitting like 28 to 35. Not the greatest number, but this is a game where in the tournament here, tomorrow, where I do think we see, 38 to 40 minutes out of him. He'll put up a 40 in that just off the volume alone. So I do like Pickett if you can get there. Not usually on Seth Lundy at 7.3. It's a little uncomfortable for me, but every time he's kind of like DJ Burns for me. Every time I go to write him off with these price increases, he just keeps performing. So he's fine for GPP, I think. But really, yeah, it's going to come down to Cam Winter or Andrew Funk. And Winter has been performing really well. And, some of that extra production he's had might be actually hurting Pickett to a degree. We saw him struggle against Northwestern. That just kind of goes without saying. I know their interior is good, but overall their defense is good. And then the Indiana game, he wasn't quite as aggressive as he had been. Got back on track against Purdue, almost had 30 fantasy points. And if his shot is falling, he should be able to easily pay off this 4-6. However, it's actually Andrew Funk that I'm seeing drawing some of the ownership talk in some of the various places that I've looked at. There's going to be a lot of threes taken on the Penn State side, and that's where we're going to need to look to Funk in that sub 5K price. He's going to need to hit some, of course, because he can, definitely do some damage if he doesn't, but he's shooting 41% from long range, and he has a ton of volume. Like, a lot of people look to Winter and Pickett as those shooters, but they're both under 120 attempts. Funk has taken 252, and it's almost kind of quiet, because unless you watch a lot of Penn State games, you might not realize just how much threes he's actually jacking up when he's on the floor. And lately, he's been on the floor a lot, 37 minutes, 34, 41, 38, 37, and 42 in all games in the month of March. So you're looking at a ton of volume and most of his shots coming from the outside. And they're going to be able to just plant him out there and say, when the ball works around to you, be ready to shoot it. So as long as some of those are falling, I think he should probably pay off the 4.9 price playing 37 to 38 minutes against this Texas A&M team. That will be content, I think, letting him jack it up, honestly, with the way that they play. This Aggies team I'm uncomfortable with the entire season for DFS purposes. My same spiel as always. Wade Taylor's the one you can trust mostly, but they have him priced up accordingly, almost 9K. The matchup against Penn State, he should be able to do damage against them, I would think. Usually I like to target interior guys against Penn State because they are a bit undersized and a bit soft down there. But I'm not using Henry Coleman. I know that much. I'm not probably using even Tyrese Radford, even though I know everyone else likes him, and I'm kind of on the outside looking in there. I might want to go with the GBP share of Julius Marble. He's been hitting his mid-range jumpers at a pretty high rate lately. He's not necessarily going down and banging like you'd like him to see, but I do think he has a matchup here against Penn State that in 20 minutes, if he gets that, he can pay it off. And I always like my man Anderson Garcia because he's super active when he's out there at 4-1. But obviously not a main team play by any means. So I don't think there's anyone on the Aggies that I can really look at. Dexter Dennis has been good to us, but this is even a spot for him where I'm a little antsy about where he falls in a main build for me. And I'm probably coming out of this one eating that chalk with Andrew Funk. Even though I don't necessarily love it, I just think there's going to be a ton of shots taken by him. So what is your opinion of this one, my good sir?
Yeah, so and this is another one that's probably on the lower total side in the 16-game slate. So I don't have a ton of interest. But, overall, I think this is a pretty good matchup for the Nittany Lions. What Texas A&M likes to do defensively is they either underscreen or they have an aggressive ice screen where they have super aggressive gap help and they give up a ton of threes. What Buzz Williams wants to do, he wants to live with you shooting over the top of it. And what does Penn State want to do? They want to get the ball into Pickett's hands and for him to find shooters, and they want to shoot a ton of threes. That's what they're comfortable doing. I think they're like the 7th, 8th, or 9th best three-point shooting team in the whole country. So this does grade out to a pretty good matchup, even fantasy-wise, for your guy Funk at 4,900. So I do understand the love. Am I going to have him in the main lineup? I don't know. He's right there with the Lynch Daniels and the Tyrese Hunter, and you have some guys in the low 5K range like Proctor and Pegs and those kind of guys. There's just a lot of options there, and I don't know if I want somebody who's just not going to get me any peripherals and just going to shoot threes. I don't know if that's somebody that I want in my main, but I get the love, and he is going to have a lot of opportunity in this one. He just needs to hit shots. So I am on the Penn State side. I do think Pickett also has a big game. It's just tough to get to a 10K price guy in a 16-game slate, especially when there's not really any 3K guys that are really attractive. So it's just really hard to get there. Him or Ace Smiths, you can't really go wrong with either. And yeah, again, like you said on the Texas A&M side, like they are not a fantasy-friendly team. Comes from different sources. Rotations are a little all over the place, besides maybe two guys who are already priced up. So I don't like the matchup for them. If anything, I would look for, like you said, either Pickett, Winter, or Funk on the Penn State side.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're moving into the last game, and this is one I actually really like, and I'm curious how much like PMR people will say for this one, because there is a little bit of injury stuff maybe to track here for Adim Bana. He's banged up. There's talk of him possibly missing. I ultimately think he'll play, and he's only 5'6", which makes him pretty intriguing if he does. But it's a game that I'm definitely going to set aside some PMR for swapping opportunities, anyways. But I like the game in general. UCLA side, I think we'll see popularity for David Singleton because, again, there's a lack of really good value. Singleton doesn't have very good rates, kind of in the low teens at times. So it's not a great play because he'll be out there for 30 plus minutes, but he is one of those guys who does a little bit of the corner standing or the cardio, as the kids like to say. So I'm a little bit nervous about him being super chalky because I feel like if I fade, then that's when he decides to shoot. And if I use him, then he's going to do a lot of that standing around. I think if Bana's out, even though they're different positions, it makes a lot of sense to use him because some of those shots he would take would have to be forced onto Singleton because we know from what we saw with Mac Etienne and Nwamba, like those guys are they're so raw. It's crazy that they're even on a P5 roster, let alone like D1. Like, I don't even know that those guys should be in a D1 roster. And Mac Etienne at one time I thought was good coming out of high school. Lo and behold, I was wrong about that. So if they have to rely on those guys, like Singleton's forced into a bigger offensive role. But I really like this spot for them. Asheville's another team. We talked about it on the bracket reveal show a lot. A lot of these mid-major teams, low-major teams that I really liked coming in, they got jobbed with their matchups. And this was one with Asheville where I would have liked to have seen them play a different, like Marquette. A matchup with Marquette, I would have been way more excited about for Asheville because Asheville has a couple of guys that we're going to talk about in a second that are viable. UCLA's defense is obviously, you touched on this. We talked a lot about UCLA actually on the Mean Street show, but Jalen Clark, and you put a stat up on Twitter, I believe that was good, but Clark's clearly the best defender they have in the heart and soul of that defense. Campbell, as much as I've seen improvements there, is nowhere near the defense level of Jalen Clark. So they definitely are hurt in that regard. But what I'm seeing from Tiger Campbell and what I love is the fact that he's shouldering a lot more of that offensive load. And I'm starting to sound like a broken record because I've said that a few times, but I really want it to sink in that nobody's probably going to roster him. They haven't been really, and his prices continued to go up. And he's continuing to produce. He's always going to have some, degree of assists, rebounds, other peripheral stats. Even though he's not known as being a terrific defender, he does have an ability to cause turnovers. He's good at anticipating passing lanes. Watching a lot of Bruins games there late night here on the West Coast, he does make things happen and get some kick started into the fast break. Now that he's scoring more, like we saw 28 against Oregon, I'm not necessarily thinking he's going to flirt with 30 real points, but I do think this new version that's scoring 16 to 20 is here to stay. And as long as he's scoring somewhere in that range or even getting to 20 real, he's going to blow the doors off the 7-9 price, even though it's going to make you feel uncomfortable paying it, especially when, people were fading him at 6'8", 6'9". He's just been paying off slate after slate for us. We had a very good Pac-12 tournament for him. Even took 21 shots against Oregon. So forced into a bigger offensive role. Hawkes, we know he takes on a lot of that too. But defenses know that they collapse on him. Campbell has to continue performing to keep those defenses honest. So I'm highest on Campbell, even though maybe, price is a little bit high. I just feel very safe about him. He's typically been a lower upside play, but this version of him without Clark is going to be really, really good in the tournament, and especially in this first game against Asheville. You also have Amari Bailey, the high pedigreed recruit, fumbled through the first part of the season, had some issues, some ailments, some being banged up, but he's definitely stepping into that role for Clark, absorbing some of the offense. Again, the defense is definitely taking a step back, as you've harped on and been right about, but offense I don't think is dropping off as much. And this is another team that people are making a big deal about the Clark injury, which I get, but I don't think it means that UCLA is suddenly going to lose in the first round to Asheville or even lose in the second or the Sweet 16. Like, this is still, to me, a team that could get to the Final Four. I personally have them going to the Elite Eight before bowing out to UConn. I think they're going to go far regardless, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them even come out of this region. Now, I know you're on the Gonzaga side of things, and that's fine, but I do think this UCLA team is a real deal and can smack the hell out of Gonzaga. And when I say that, I don't mean they're going to blow them out, but I do think they can punch them in the mouth and control that game. I am that high on the Bruins. And as a Pac-12 Husky fan, and I'm not the guy that, I want my Pac-12 to do well. I hate everyone in the Pac-12 as a Husky fan. I'm that type of guy. but I do like this Bruins team. And I want to have plenty of exposure to Campbell and Bailey both. I don't know that I'll be able to get to Jaquez. He's a luxury play at 9.5, and he hasn't really been hitting that higher upside mark that you really need at 9.5. He did have a 43 against Arizona recently, which was nice, but you're typically going to see him in that like low to mid 30s range. Theoretically, he should step up and hit 40 plus without Clark more often, taking more shots. Like we saw 18 attempts against Arizona in their last game, and his last 2 against Arizona have been pretty solid. Comes with guard forward eligibility, so you can jam him in there at forward, which is a position that's habitually hard to fill. And if you have that salary for Jaquez, I certainly don't mind it. I just think that you're going to use that salary to pay up on some of those earlier slate games. Where you want to look to here is the Campbell-Bailey group with possible swaps for even a guy like Drew Pember, who we'll talk about right now. So on the Asheville side, they do have the great Drew Pember. They tried to lose in their conference tournament. There was a few close calls there. That game against USC Upstate really tested them. I love that Upstate team. And then even against Campbell, which made that unlikely run, they really tested them. But alas, we get Drew Pember into the tournament, even though it's a tougher matchup. Does everything for this team. Another guy that, basically their entire offense, he doesn't have the assist rates of, Tosin or Derek Walker by any means, but he does have a high usage rate over 31%, shot rate of 29%. He shoots almost 40% from long range as a big man, basically 7 feet. So he's able to step out and knock down some shots. He has a fouls drawn rate of 8.3, which is actually per KenPom number 1 in the country, 7% block rate, a defensive rebounding rate of 25%. Now you'd think a guy like that, okay, draws fouls, he initiates contact, he probably has a pretty high foul rate. Well, he only has a foul rate of 3 per 40, which he's really worked on throughout the course of his career. While he was at Tennessee, that number was up around 5. He's worked this season to get it down, and he's not a guy that's hacking and getting into foul trouble. He's really developed. Now, a lot of people like to say, well, he was at Tennessee, didn't work out. What's to say that he's going to be able to handle this UCLA team? And that's a viable point. And looking at, some of the games he's had, there hasn't been a ton of upper tier competition this season. He did have a game against Arkansas where offensively he struggled by far. And then he had a game against Dayton where they have a very good interior and good defense as a whole, but he had 16 points, 8 rebounds against them, which I say was probably a winning score against a team like Dayton. So we have a short sample there against upper tier competition. If Bona doesn't go, that obviously, that fouls drawn rate against Mac Etienne and David Nwamba, like, holy hell, those guys might both foul out in like 3 minutes of guarding Drew Pember if it comes down to it. So they need Bona to get out there and check Pember there a little bit. So a lot of that for me, if the price on Pember is cheap enough to really look at, if he would have been like the 9K, like, some of these other mid-major pay-up guys or Max Asmus level, I think we could probably get away, but we have to certainly look at him even against UCLA at 8K, potentially with Bona banged up, out, limited, whatever it might be. Because honestly, the rest of that UCLA front court, I just can't even believe they're that bad and couldn't recruit anyone else besides Mac Etienne. Like, it's an outrage. So I like Pember a lot, and I'll probably set aside 2 places in my lineup for this game. And it might even be 3 because I like it that much. There's other options on this Asheville team that you could potentially look at. Tyjon Jones at 7.2 is certainly intriguing. He is another guy in Asheville that's played well. The UCLA defense taking that step back without Clark means that Jones should be able to do a little bit of damage. He's a big-time sniper on 203 attempts. He's made 46% of those threes. Definitely plays a ton of minutes, one of the most on the teams, has a very high top 20 in both true shooting and effective field goal percentage, draws about 3 fouls per quarter, mainly a shooter, but he's able to get up so many shots that he can pay off a price like 7.2, mainly with his scoring. But he has shown a new kind of lease on life, I guess. He's been rebounding really well in the conference tournament. And without Bona, potentially, those rebounding opportunities could still be there for Jones. So I kind of like him at 7.2 as well. Not a main team play per se, but somebody that if you're looking for leverage or even you get to the end of the slate and you're trying to chase somebody down in a tournament, Pember's probably the salary. You figure out the calculations and, okay, they most likely have Pember. You have that salary. You can go to Campbell or you could drop down to Jones, who's going to be very low owned, and try to catch them that way. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying here. I love the chess game aspect of this, especially if you make the mania or you're in these tournaments where you're trying to chase somebody down. I really like that aspect of it and trying to figure out the puzzle. There's a lot of swap opportunities in this game alone. So you want to set, from my opinion, I think you want to set aside at least 2 pieces of PMR here to make those potential moves. What say you, my man?
So, well, I do love this UCLA team. I know I picked the Zags in my bracket, but that doesn't mean that I don't love this UCLA team. I think when 100% healthy, they are the second best. And I tweeted about this. I think they're the second best team behind Houston in the whole country. And even without Clark, this team is still really good. We just saw them take Arizona to the brink. And hold them to 61 points as well. So I know I did put out that stat that their defense isn't as good with Jalen Clark, but it's still pretty damn good if you're going to hold Arizona to 61 points. So yeah, I mean, the question I held back and forth on this matchup is, I mean, I think Pember is going to be pretty popular. I mean, people are going to look at his box scores. They're going to look at his average fantasy points per game. It's like 43 at 8K. I mean, it's really hard to fade this guy at that price. But man, is that matchup with UCLA scary? I don't know. Like, I think you can get a lot of leverage going down to somebody like Tiger or Juwan Roberts, like I said before. And maybe Pember, right? Because I was looking at his box scores against higher competition. He hasn't really performed that well. Maybe he puts up 28 fantasy points, and that's not good enough at that price point where you can get maybe 38 from Tiger or 38 from Juwan Roberts or somebody like that. So I'm really on the fence with this one. I think he's going to be really popular. It's just, do I want to play him in my main or not? But like you said, the good thing is it's the last game of the slate. So, if you're up, keep him in. If not, then maybe you pivot. Maybe it's that kind of move. But as far as the matchup, this Asheville team is really talented. I mean, outside of Pember, they're actually pretty good. Pember is obviously a matchup problem. Like you said, they're a little thin up front. So, I think he can get to the foul line a lot. What this Asheville team does is jock up threes. So if they're hitting their threes, they can keep this one kind of close. I do have a play on the plus 18. I just think that number is a little too high, especially with a shorthanded UCLA team. But do I think they have a chance of winning? It's really, I don't know about that. Yeah. I mean, this UCLA team is so disciplined. Very well coached with Mick Cronin. Even without Jalen Clark, they're still pretty good defensively. And they have I'm with you, Walt. I am one of the biggest Tiger Campbell fans. I've always been. I think he hasn't put up the stats historically because he's a pass first point guard and he puts winning above his individual performances. So when he had to turn it on, when Jalen Clark went out and they had a couple other guys banged up, he did. He has that level to his game. And that's what we're seeing right now. And he's playing really, really well. But he wasn't putting those numbers up historically, but I don't think it's because of his ability. I think it's just because he's trying to win and get his teammates involved. So I'm a huge Tiger Campbell fan. And I'm a huge Jaime Jaquez fan. I think they have the best 1-2 punch in the entire country. They can totally make a Final Four. They could totally make a run to the championship. I just think if we're going back to that conversation we had before, I love the Zags team too. And if there's a little bit of doubt about the UCLA defense, I think I lean the Zags in that matchup, but that's another conversation me and you can have. Yeah. But in this matchup, yeah, I think Tiger, I think Singleton is definitely in that 5K range as a value play. I think he's totally in there. I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity. He's going to play 30 to 35 minutes. UCLA should be able to score on this Asheville defense. So he's a good play there as well. For me, Bailey's a little priced up a little too high. I'd rather move up to that 7-8K range and play some of those guys. But for me, it's Tiger, Pember, and Singleton are the plays for me.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll get a chance. Hopefully we'll get that matchup between the Bruins and the Zags where we can really just spend time diving into it and talking through it. Cause I wanted to get a chance to talk more, but I gotta keep my word and keep this to the 2 hours or roughly at. So we're just wrapping up here, but yeah, that's going to be a big decision, I think, with the Pember move. And it's really going to depend on where you sit. And you have to be cognizant of these start times on the tournaments because some of them run long. So you might think you have till 9:50 Eastern on that game, but make sure you realize that the game before it runs long, you got to make that decision ahead of time. So really be paying attention to time frame of the games and your opponent's score if you're looking to jockey or you're in range of a tournament takedown and you're trying to figure those things out. There's a lot of strategy involved this time of year. And if you get it right, you can really get paid off. But that Pember decision is going to loom large, and hopefully getting that Bono news, before the last possible second. I don't want to get it too soon because everyone will be able to adjust, but I also don't want like 2 minutes to make the decision because that's when mistakes happen. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm borderline playing Campbell over Pember straight up if I have to, but I think I might be playing 2 from this game anyways. But I'm on Campbell, so he's been my guy. All right, so let's get a core, and then I got a couple prize picks that I want to give, and then we'll get out of here. So it's a huge slate. The nice thing about this with this kind of pricing, there's not a ton of plays that are going to be so highly owned. There's a couple I think will be popular, but I'm not foreseeing a bunch of chalk and having these 2v2, 1v1 situations that we were having in the middle part of the season that honestly suck. I think we'll see some spread out ownership, and I like that. That's more fun to me. More of a puzzle and more difficult pricing means that there's a bigger edge for guys like yourself and me. What's your core looking like right now, though? There's a vast variety of options, but I'm very curious. I don't think we'll overlap this time.
Yeah, so I don't think I can give a core on this episode just because I know that some of my opponents in the Mania are going to be listening.
Oh yeah, good point. You're right.
So I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah,
but
good point.
Listen, just to echo what you said before, and I apologize for not giving a core.
No, you're right.
I think through the plays that we've made, and just to echo what you said before, I think DraftKings did a fantastic job of pricing on this slate. Like you said, a lot of guys are priced up, and I don't think we see a ton of high owned guys. So you have to be creative. And for me, roster construction is, and we talked about the guys that we like specifically in the forward spot up in that high to mid 8 range. So I think you should focus there. And then we talked about a lot of guards and maybe a couple forwards sprinkled in there in that high 4, low 5K range, where that's where I think my roster construction or a lot of roster construction should be around. And I think you can just get a good base by starting there. So that's the most I'm going to say about where I'm going. But I don't want to give too much away because I have a couple seats riding on, and I know some of my opponents will probably be listening to this to get an edge.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that for sure. So for me, I'm looking at kind of at my value core pieces like between Dockery and Shai Odom. I do have a better read, I feel like, on Shai Odom. Like that's just Shai Odom is a guy I like. I think the beginning part of the season he was super raw. He still is, but he's starting to figure things out. And I think he's going to revel in this opportunity to play against a team like Kansas. We're going to see him next year come out and just be a ferocious beast. So I like him at the 4-3. So right now he's my value, my favorite value. That could change between now and the next 9 hours, but as of right this second in my lineup, that's where I'm kind of leaning. The Tiger Campbell play, I'm pretty well married to at this point, so he will be in my lineup. So I might as well make him a core. In true, Dub Deuces, Walt Waddell fashion, I'm sticking to my guns there, and I don't expect him to carry a ton of ownership either. A lot of guys won't, and if this would have been like an 8-game slate, I still wouldn't have expected that much ownership for him. So I love the Campbell play. We've been riding it all week, the past 2 weeks really. I expect it to continue to keep playing. Now the Posh play is going to be, and this might not turn out to be. For this slate, the high ownership has to be considered probably like 18 to 30%. I don't know what the actual ownership will end up being on Demoy Hodge. I suspect it'll be under 15%, but right now he's going to carry the Posh play label as of this moment. I am also in agreement. I like the Missouri side much more. We talked about that, an hour or two ago at this point. The field seems to be very high on Utah State. I'm slightly uneasy about that. I just like this spot for Des Moines Hodge. Of course, Kobe Brown, DeAndre Golston, some of these other options. But Hodge has just been very good to us. The fact that he's scoring a lot now, kind of like Tiger Campbell. He's got those peripherals, but he's scoring now. And when you have those things all clicking, it just seems inevitable that he's going to put up 35-plus fantasy points. More than enough for me at 8-3. I'm all over him. PrizePicks plays. I'm going to give a couple real quick, and then we'll let you go here. Tiger Campbell over 24.5 PRA. Go figure. I like the PrizePicks of the DFS plays. I like. He's been really good. That PRA for him has been solid. It was 21.5 most of the week in the other games, and he paid that off. We did have it at 24.5 recently, and that also paid. So I'm going to keep hitting that one. And then going over to my guy Dylan Disu, who I do feel very passionately about. 18.5 PRA against Colgate. I just feel like a double-digit rebound game could be coming here. Keegan Records just isn't going to have the athleticism to check him. And in that same game, you have Tyrese Hunter who's sitting there at 16.5 PRA. They keep disrespecting him because of his total season number, but lately he's been paying that off. And I think he's going to score something like 15 real points. So we don't need a whole lot of other stats to hit that PRA number. So I'm on those 3 plays. There will be more in the FTNdaily.com PrizePicks tracker. Also, we'll have some prop plays, sides, totals, all that stuff in the FTN bets tracker. Mike's been killing it on his prop betting, and overall this season he's up a $250,000 unit. Expect him to put on some more plays. He's already got the tracker loaded up. Lots of stuff going on. There will be a article for that slate. There'll be one for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the Super Show will continue to roll out tomorrow night, Saturday night as well. And then there will be some additional pieces of content throughout the Discord, breaking down some of those smaller slates. I know people will be playing those. We'll have some core stuff and things like that. I'll be around throughout the tournament. This is my time where I say, hell no to my regular job, and I just watch basketball on the computer, on the TV, on the phone, each and every place that I can. Have every TV in the house on. I'm sure you do the same. So I'm looking forward to it. Good luck in the Mania, Mike. I'm obviously pulling for you, and I am looking forward to seeing you make a deep run in that. And we'll get with you and see when we can have you on next. But get some rest, do your thing, and we'll see you next time.
I appreciate you, Walt. Best of luck tomorrow as well.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you later. Bright and early in the morning. Don't oversleep, and let's get it.